Picture a single stone, a block of granite larger than a city bus, resting in a quarry under a baking sun. Now imagine moving it, not a few yards but over 100 miles of rugged hills, across rushing rivers through dense forests without a single engine to help. This was not an isolated task. It was one link in a chain, a single note in a symphony of effort that played out for generations. Across our planet, the most breathtaking monuments ever built, the pyramids, the great cathedrals, the mysterious stone circles, all share a profound secret. Their true story is not written solely in the silent stones we see today. It is written in the journeys those stones took, in the forests that vanished to fuel their creation, and in the lives of countless individuals whose names are lost to time, all bound together by a single, staggering necessity. They required long-distance resource networks of a scale and complexity that defy belief. We often stand before these ancient wonders and ask how. How did they cut such perfect blocks? How did they lift them so high? But these questions only scratch the surface. The deeper, more astonishing mystery lies in the before. Before the first stone was set, a silent mobilization was already across continents. It was a mobilization of geography, of ecology, of entire economies. How do you feed an army of artisans working for decades in a remote desert? Where do you find a specific type of cedar, renowned for its scent and strength, when it only grows 1,000 miles across the sea? What compels a community to dedicate generations to hauling megaliths from a distant mountain range to a barren plain? The answers transform these static monuments into living, breathing testaments to human connection. This is the hidden reality we are about to uncover. Today, we embark on a journey to trace these silent, sprawling lifelines that made the impossible possible. We are going to explore the long-distance resource networks required to sustain monumental construction. We will follow the paths of stone from Welsh hills to English plains, track the voyage of sacred timber across the Mediterranean, and map the invisible flows of food and faith that sustain these epic endeavors. We will discover how these forgotten supply chains did much more than just build structures. They shaped the very fabric of ancient empires, forged the earliest global trade routes, and became monuments in their own right, etched into the landscape by countless footsteps. The revelation is this: the true wonder often lies not in the majestic facade we admire today, but in the colossal, coordinated human effort it took to will it into being. So let us begin by understanding the sheer scale of the ambition that demanded such networks in the first place. To grasp the immense challenge of these networks, we first need to stand in the shadow of the ambition itself. What do we mean when we say monumental construction? It is a term we use often, but its true weight is staggering. We are not talking about a large palace or a tall temple. Monumental construction represents a category of its own, a leap in scale and intention that pushes against the very limits of what a society believes is possible. These projects are defined by three interlocking qualities: sheer physical size, breathtaking complexity, and profound symbolic weight. First, consider the sheer physicality. The Great Pyramid of Giza originally stood at 481 feet tall, composed of an estimated 2.3 million stone blocks. The Gothic Cathedral of Chartres rises from the French plains, its spire piercing the sky, built from thousands of tons of precisely cut limestone. These structures dominate their landscapes, not just visually but psychologically. They become permanent features, altering horizons and casting long shadows for miles. Their scale immediately communicates one clear message: the builders operated on a different plane of capability, commanding resources and labor that seemed to belong to a different world entirely. But size alone is not enough. Complexity is the silent partner to scale. It is one thing to pile rocks high. It is another to engineer the internal chambers of a pyramid to precise astronomical alignments, or to design a cathedral's vaulted ceiling so that stone appears to defy gravity, floating on pillars of light. This complexity extends to the materials themselves, using specific types of stone for specific purposes, intricate metalwork for reinforcement and decoration, and complex mortars that have endured for centuries. Each of these choices, each precise cut and careful join, represents a deep pool of specialized knowledge, a mastery of physics, mathematics, and craft that had to be coordinated across decades, sometimes even generations of work. Which leads us to the third and most powerful driver: symbolic weight. A monument is never just a building. It is a statement etched in stone. For the pharaohs, the pyramid was a machine for resurrection, a to the stars, and an undeniable declaration of divine kingship that every subject could see from miles away. For medieval Europe, the cathedral was a Bible for the illiterate, its sculptures and stained glass telling sacred stories, its heavenward reach an act of devotion meant to bridge earth and the divine. In places like Stonehenge, the arrangement of stones served as a colossal calendar and ceremonial site, anchoring the community's understanding of time and their place in the cosmos. The monument becomes the physical heart of a civilization's identity, its values, and its aspirations. And here we arrive at the central, compelling contradiction that makes these structures so fascinating. They are profoundly local in their presence, rooted to one specific, sacred, or strategic spot. Yet their creation almost always demanded resources that were profoundly local. The immediate surroundings of the Giza Plateau did not contain the vast quantities of fine white limestone for its casing, or the granite for its internal chambers. The Salisbury Plain, where Stonehenge sits, did not have the unique bluestones that form its inner circle. This mismatch is the core of our mystery. A civilization would choose a site for its spiritual, political, or symbolic significance, and then face an immense practical problem. The location simply did not, and could not, provide everything needed to fulfill the vision. This gap between local capacity and grand ambition is the vacuum into which long-distance resource networks rushed. The monument's location is the fixed point, the destination. But its true source of materials, labor, and even ideas is diffuse, spread across a vast and varied landscape. The pyramid is in Egypt, but its copper tools may trace back to mines in the Sinai, its cedar timber to the forests of Lebanon, its gold to Nubia far to the south. The cathedral is in France, but the knowledge of its flying buttresses may have traveled from another site, its stained glass techniques imported by itinerant artisans, its lead for roofing sourced from distant mines. Therefore, the act of building something monumental was never just an architectural endeavor. It was first and foremost a logistical one. It was the ultimate supply chain puzzle, conceived centuries before the term existed. Before a single foundation stone could be laid, a civilization had to answer a series of daunting questions. Where do we get materials we cannot find here? How do we move them across impossible distances? How do we feed and house the army of people required to do this work? And perhaps most importantly, how do we organize, manage, and pay for this entire colossal undertaking, often for longer than a single human lifetime? The networks that answered these questions were the true engines of creation. They were the invisible frameworks upon which these visible wonders were hung. So, with an understanding of the monumental ambition that started it all, we can now begin our journey along the first and most iconic of these networks, the path of the megalith, following stones on their incredible journeys from distant quarries to their final sacred resting places. So we arrive at the first and most tangible of these ancient lifelines, the network dedicated to stone itself. When we think of ancient wonders, our minds fill with images of colossal blocks, of pillars and lintels that seem to defy the very idea of movement. And that is precisely where the mystery and the genius begins. To understand these networks, we must follow a single stone on its epic journey from a forgotten hillside to its place of eternal honor. Let us take, as our guide, one of the most famous and puzzling examples, the Bluestones of Stonehenge. Their story starts not on the windswept Salisbury Plain where they stand today, but in the rugged hills of West Wales, a distance of over 140 miles as the crow flies. This fact alone is staggering. We are not talking about moving small pebbles or even manageable boulders. Each of these bluestones, a distinct type of spotted dolerite rock, weighs multiple tons. Someone, or more accurately, some organized community, made a conscious decision that this specific stone, from this specific mountain range over 100 miles away, was the only material suitable for their sacred circle. The value was not just in its durability, but likely in its perceived spiritual or symbolic properties, making the immense effort to fetch it a fundamental part of its power. This immediately tells us the network was driven by more than mere convenience. It was shaped by intention and belief. Now, how do you move a 4-ton stone the length of a modern marathon across a landscape of rolling hills, dense forests, and wide rivers. There were no diesel trucks, no flatbed trailers. The answer lies in a symphony of simple technologies orchestrated with breathtaking patience. The first movement was extraction. At the quarry site, workers would have carefully separated the stone from the living rock, likely using heat from fires followed by dousing with water to create thermal shock and fracture lines, then prying with wooden or antler levers. Once free, the rough block would be shaped, its surfaces hammered with stone mauls to form something closer to its final shape, because it is always easier to trim weight at the source than to drag unnecessary bulk every single mile. Then began the overland haul, perhaps the most physically demanding phase. The prevailing image is of teams of people using ropes to pull the stone on a sledge, a massive wooden sled, which itself would have been a significant product of the timber network. To reduce friction, this sledge might slide over a track of greased logs or rollers. Think of it as a primitive but effective conveyor belt made of tree trunks. As the stone moved forward, rollers from the back would be carried to the front, creating a continuous, if painstakingly slow, path. The coordination required here is immense, with teams likely working in shifts, chanting in rhythm to synchronize their pulls. They would have followed carefully scouted routes, avoiding the steepest incline, seeking out the firmest ground. This was not a blind drag, it was a calculated navigation of the terrain. The 140 miles of pure overland haul would have been an almost unimaginable expenditure of energy and time. This is where the network reveals its sophistication, its ability to shift modes of transport. Researchers believe the journey almost certainly leveraged water. Rivers were the ancient superhighways. The most plausible theories suggest the stones were dragged to a nearby river in Wales, loaded onto rafts or secured between canoes, and floated downstream to the sea. Then they would have embarked on a daring coastal voyage, sailing across the Bristol Channel and eastward along the southern coast of Britain. Finally, they would have traveled up other rivers like the Avon, getting as close to Salisbury Plain as the Waterways would allow. The final leg would again be overland, completing the circuit. This multi-stage journey transforms the story from a simple pull into a complex logistical operation. It required knowledge of seasonal water levels, of tides and currents, and of boat building strong enough to carry such a precarious load. It implies the existence of waypoints, places where the stones could be temporarily stored or where crews and equipment were exchanged. And this is the profound realization: the journey of a single bluestone encapsulates the entire challenge of the long-distance network. Every single step represents a different problem to solve. Extraction required geology and quarrying skill. Intermediate storage required security and organization. The overland haul required brute force, route planning, and communal labor. Water transport required nautical engineering and courage. Final placement required precise engineering and ritual significance. Each stage depended on the one before it, and a failure at any point, a sunken raft, a broken sledge, a depleted workforce, would stop the entire process cold. This was not a single act, but a chain of interconnected acts, a supply pipeline operating at a glacial pace, yet with a relentless purpose. Furthermore, this network was not operating in a vacuum. Moving these stones across such distances meant crossing territories, possibly those of other communities. This implies some form of diplomacy, trade, or shared cultural understanding that allowed safe passage. Perhaps the movement itself was a ceremonial act, with communities along the route contributing labor as part of a shared pilgrimage, pulling the sacred stone through their lands as an honor. The network, therefore, was as much a social and political construct as it was a transportation one. It wove together different groups in a common, tangible project, with the stone itself as the unifying object moving through the landscape, gathering meaning and story with every mile it traveled. So when we look at Stonehenge today, we are not just looking at a circle of stones. We are looking at the final destination of a 140-mile journey that took years, perhaps decades, to complete for just one of them. We are seeing the silent testament to a network that could plan across vast geographies and generations, that could harness human muscle, wooden tools, and natural waterways to achieve what seems, even to us today, nearly impossible. The Bluestones' journey is in ancient logistics, a quiet symphony of effort where the movement was as monumental as the destination. And stone was just the beginning, For while these megaliths capture our imagination, they could not have been raised without another, more perishable resource, one that literally fueled the fires of creation, vanishing into smoke and leaving only traces in the soil. Yet for all the enduring power of stone, it tells only half the story. If we listen closely to the silent monuments, we can almost hear the crackle of another, more ephemeral resource burning away, leaving behind only whispers in the archaeological record. While granite and marble stand defiant against the centuries, the true workhorse of ancient construction was a material that returned to the earth as quickly as it was consumed: wood. The networks dedicated to timber and fuel were the lifeblood of these projects, a sprawling, often overlooked system that turned living forests into the heat, leverage, and literal framework for building the impossible. Consider the sheer volume required. We marvel at the stone blocks of the Great Pyramid, but before a single one could be set in place, armies of workers needed to move them. That meant sledges, massive wooden platforms that could weigh as much as the stones they carried. It meant log rollers laid down like temporary tracks, each one a tree trunk stripped and smoothed. It meant levers, crowbars, and the handles for countless tools. As construction rose skyward, intricate scaffolding of lashed poles encased the growing structure, a temporary skeleton of wood that allowed masons to work at dizzying heights. This scaffolding was not a minor accessory. It was an entire temporary building in itself, requiring forests' worth of straight, strong timber, all of which was used, reused, and ultimately discarded or burned. The monument we see today is, in a very real sense, a ghost, the negative space left behind after this vast wooden support system was removed. But the most voracious appetite for wood was not for structure, but for transformation. To make mortar, you need lime. To make lime, you must burn limestone in a kiln at searing temperatures for days. The fuel for that fire, charcoal, produced by slowly burning wood in controlled, oxygen-poor conditions. The scale is almost incomprehensible. Historical records and archaeological evidence from medieval Europe, for instance, reveal that building a single cathedral could consume the wood from an entire forest spanning thousands of acres. The limestone for the mortar of Cologne Cathedral did not just come from a nearby quarry. It was born from fires fed by trees cut from the Black Forest and floated down the Rhine River. This created a radiating ring of environmental impact. The construction site was not just a point of assembly. It was the epicenter of a wave of deforestation that spread outward for dozens, even hundreds of miles. Woodland management became a critical arm of state logistics, with foresters designating tracts for harvest, coppicing trees to ensure a future supply, and organizing the cutting and transport seasons around snowmelt and river levels to float the logs efficiently. This highlights a crucial and often underestimated aspect of these networks. They dealt in bulk and weight, not just preciousness. Transporting a 1-ton block of fine marble was a high-value, precision operation. Transporting 100 tons of firewood or charcoal was a problem of sheer mass and volume. The value per pound was low, but the necessity was absolute. This forced the development of highly efficient, low-cost transport methods. Rivers, once again, were the answer. A single raft could carry a small mountain of logs downstream, with the current doing most of the work. Where rivers were not available, the need to move this bulky material often drove the improvement of roads and the development of stronger carts pulled by oxen. The timber network, therefore, was not a glamorous side operation. It was the foundational logistics chain that made all other refinement possible. It was the delivery system for the very energy, in the form of heat, required to turn raw stone into a bonded building. The environmental legacy of this consumption is written deep in the soil. Palynologists, scientists who study ancient pollen, can read these stories in sediment cores. Layers corresponding to periods of intense monument building often show a dramatic decline in tree pollen, replaced by grasses and plants that thrive in cleared land. In places like Easter Island, though an extreme example, the evidence suggests that the relentless demand for timber for rollers, levers, and scaffolding for the massive statues may have contributed significantly to the island's deforestation, with profound consequences for the society itself. This teaches us that the footprint of a monument extended far beyond its foundation. It reached into distant valleys, changing ecosystems, altering water runoff patterns, and reshaping the very landscape that supplied it. The quest for timber was a form of ecological engineering, intentional or not. So when we stand before an ancient stone colossus, we must train our eyes to see the invisible. See the vanished forest that fueled the kilns whose lime binds each block. See the ghostly scaffolding that once embraced its form. Hear the groan of wooden sledges and the splash of log rafts on long silent rivers. The stone is the final statement, but the timber was the voice that spoke it into existence, a necessary resource that burned away to leave only the enduring impression of its heat and strength. And just as fire transforms wood into energy, another set of networks was dedicated to transforming earth into a different kind of power, the hard, sharp, gleaming power of metal, without which the stone itself could never have been shaped. While timber provided the energy and framework, another network delivered the very teeth of construction, the sharp, unyielding edge that could bite into stone and shape destiny. This was the realm of metal, a substance that transformed humanity's relationship with the physical world. Imagine for a moment the sound of a copper chisel striking limestone. That resonant ping represents more than just a tool at work. It is the endpoint of an astonishing journey, a journey that began in a rocky seam deep within a distant mountain. The networks established to bring metal to the monument builder's hand were among the most complex and far-reaching of the ancient world, dealing not in bulky abundance like timber, but in concentrated, high-value commodities whose sources were locked in specific, and often remote, corners of the globe. Fundamental challenge was geological rarity. Unlike clay or common stone, deposits of copper, and especially the tin required to alloy it into the harder bronze, are not found everywhere. Major sources were separated by vast distances. The copper mines of Cyprus, whose name gives us the word copper itself, supplied the ancient Near East. Tin, that crucial but elusive ingredient, flowed from only a handful of known locations, like Cornwall in southwestern Britain and distant Afghanistan. To build a bronze chisel for a pyramid worker in Giza, the Egyptian state had to effectively connect these dots across continents and seas. The tin from Cornwall would travel overland to the coast, be shipped across the English Channel, journey down the rivers of Europe, cross the Alps with great difficulty, and finally be loaded onto Mediterranean ships bound for Egypt. This was not a simple supply line. It was a fragile multi-stage relay race involving miners, merchants, sailors, and from dozens of different cultures, each link in the chain vital. The Bronze Age, therefore, was built on a literal network of tin, a web of trade so essential that its disruption could stall civilizations. But to think of this metal network as merely a pipeline for practical tools is to miss half of its purpose and all of its splendor. Yes, the copper and bronze delivered hardened saws for cutting stone, sturdy axes for felling the timber we just discussed, and heavy drills for boring holes. These were the workaday instruments of creation. Yet metal also served the language of power and the divine. Once smelted and refined, it was transformed into dazzling ornamentation, thin sheets of gold to cap a flashing in the sun, gleaming bronze cladding for temple doors, or life-size statues of gods and pharaohs cast with breathtaking skill. The same network that supplied a miner's pick also supplied the material for a king's sarcophagus. This duality is crucial. The metal network was a single conduit serving two masters, the gritty, practical needs of the construction site and the symbolic, awe-inspiring demands of state propaganda and religious devotion. It connected the sooty, dangerous world of the furnace tender to the polished, sacred space of the inner sanctum. This journey from ore to object also created a chain of specialized labor that itself became a mobile resource. Mining was a brutal, specialized skill, often performed by slaves or condemned workers in terrifying underground galleries. Smelting, the process of extracting metal from rock using intense heat from charcoal furnaces, required its own experts who understood airflow, temperature, and the magical-seeming transformation of stone into liquid metal. Then came the smiths and casters, the true wizards of the age, who could alloy copper with tin to the perfect ratio, pour molten bronze into intricate molds, and hammer sheets of gold thinner than a leaf. These specialists, particularly the master metalworkers, were sometimes the most traveled individuals in the ancient world. Their knowledge was a form of treasure, and they might be summoned from one great project to another, carrying their techniques and styles with them. The uniformity of certain metalworking methods found across wide regions, from Mesopotamia to the Aegean, speaks to this movement of people and ideas along the same routes as the raw ingots. The metal network, therefore, was not just moving material, it was circulating the very expertise needed to unlock that material's potential, making it a highway for innovation as much as for commerce. The economic and political implications were profound. Control over these metal sources, or the trade routes that carried them, was a primary objective of empires. Pharaohs launched military expeditions to the Sinai Peninsula to secure copper and turquoise mines. The Mycenaean Greeks established far-flung trading posts to secure access to metals. This need could drive exploration, foster diplomacy, or ignite conflict. It also led to the development of early forms of currency and standardized weights, as ingots of copper and tin became a reliable store of value and a medium of exchange across linguistic barriers. A loaf of bread might vary from village to village, but a standardized copper ingot, shaped like an ox hide for easy carrying, held recognized value from Egypt to Anatolia. Thus, the logistical needs of monumental construction helped fuel the development of interconnected economies, turning isolated building projects into nodes within a growing global system of exchange. Yet, moving these heavy ingots and finished objects, whether a ton of copper or a colossal bronze statue, presented a final physical challenge that brings us to the most elegant solution the ancient world ever devised for moving mass over distance: the transformative power of water itself. All the copper, tin, and timber in the world would have been useless without the force to wield it, the countless hands to move it, and the enduring will to see the task through. This brings us to the most complex and fragile resource of all, the human being. While we often marvel at the stones, the true masterpiece of logistics was not the movement of rock, but the maintenance of life itself. Mobilizing a workforce that could number in the tens of thousands, a temporary city of laborers, artisans, and overseers, and sustaining that population not for weeks but for decades, was a challenge that dwarfed even the engineering of the monument. This was the social engine, a vast and living network dedicated solely to fueling human energy, and its smooth operation was the difference between a wonder of the world and a forgotten, half-built ruin. Consider the scale. A project like the Great Pyramid of Giza likely required a workforce of 20,000 to 30,000 people at any given time, not as slaves under the lash as old tales suggest, but as rotating crews of conscripted laborers fulfilling a form of national service. These were farmers who worked on the monument during the Nile's flood season, when their fields were underwater and agricultural labor was impossible. But this seasonal rhythm only solved part of the problem. It provided the bodies but not their daily survival. This workforce, concentrated on the desert plateau at Giza, was in a location utterly incapable of supporting it. No water, no farmland, no natural resources existed there. Every single calorie of food, every drop of water, every piece of clothing, and every stick of firewood had to be imported. This created a parallel, inverted pyramid of supply, a sustenance network whose base was the entire fertile Nile Valley and whose apex was the arid construction site. Archaeology has peeled back the desert sand to reveal the astonishing infrastructure of this human supply chain. Excavations around Giza have uncovered not tombs for slaves, but well-organized settlements for workers, complete with barracks, bakeries, breweries, and even hospitals. The bakery complexes were industrial in scale, capable of producing thousands of loaves of bread daily. Adjacent breweries churned out a thick, nutritious beer, a staple of the Egyptian diet that provided calories and hydration, and was even used as a form of payment. We have found evidence of massive fish drying operations, where catches from the Nile were preserved to provide protein. This on-site production was the final node in a riverine network that stretched for hundreds of miles. Barges laden with grain from estates in Upper Egypt, cattle driven from delta pastures, and clay jars filled with honey and dates would travel north with the current. The Nile was not just a spiritual artery for Egypt, it was a literal conveyor belt for calories, a slow-moving, predictable highway that made the concentration of a colossal workforce feasible. The management of this network required a bureaucracy of breathtaking precision. Scribes kept meticulous records on papyrus and pottery shards, accounting for daily bread rations, beer distributions, and absences due to illness or injury. They tracked the incoming shipments from distant provinces, ensuring that the granaries at the plateau were always stocked ahead of need. This was a just-in-time delivery system operating with Bronze Age technology, and its margin for error was slim. A single poor harvest upstream, a disruption in river transport, or an outbreak of illness in the cramped worker settlements could bring the entire enterprise to a catastrophic halt. Preventing famine and controlling disease were not humanitarian afterthoughts, they were central strategic objectives. A sick or starving workforce cannot move multi-ton blocks. The medical care evidenced at the site, from setting broken bones to treating infections, was a direct investment in maintaining the project's momentum. The logistics of sustenance were, therefore, a profound exercise in state power and planning, demonstrating an ability to assess, collect, and redistribute the agricultural surplus of an entire kingdom with relentless efficiency. This human network also had a profound social dimension. The workers were not anonymous cogs. Evidence from their settlements shows they were organized into labor gangs with names like the Friends of Khufu or the Drunkards of, groups that took pride in their work and competed with each other. They received regular rations of food, beer, and occasionally finer goods like linen and oils. This system created a form of social contract, where the state provided security and sustenance in return for labor on a national project that reinforced communal identity and divine order. The pyramid was not built on the backs of the people, in a purely exploitative sense, but by the collective effort of the people, fed and coordinated by a network that turned the scattered agricultural output of the Nile Valley into the focused physical energy required to build for eternity. And just as the river was the perfect solution for moving grain and people, it presented a model for an even greater logistical leap, the movement of the monument's heaviest components. For when you need to move a 200-ton stone obelisk or a granite column meant to last forever, you look beyond the cart and the ox, and you turn to the ancient world's only true superhighway, the path of least resistance carved by nature itself, the boundless potential of water. While the social engine of food and labor kept the human machine running, the physical challenge of moving the monument's very bones remained. And for that, ancient engineers confronted a fundamental law of physics, the brutal reality of friction. Dragging a 100-ton stone block overland, even on rollers, required a staggering amount of sustained human or animal power, chewing through resources and time at an unsustainable rate. But these master builders discovered a remarkable loophole in this physical law, a way to cheat friction almost entirely. They looked to the world's natural highways, the paths where the land itself gave way and offered a fluid, buoyant road. They turned to waterways. In a world without engines, rivers, canals, and coastal seas were not just convenient routes, they were the only feasible method for moving the heaviest cargo across great distances. They became the silent, flowing superhighways upon which the weight of empires literally floated. The efficiency difference is almost incomprehensible to the modern mind. Historical estimates suggest that on land, a team of oxen might struggle to pull a load of 1 or 2 tons on a crude cart. That same load placed on a flat-bottomed barge, pushed by the current or pulled by a team walking along a towpath on the riverbank, could be 100-fold. A single, large river barge could carry the equivalent of hundreds of cartloads, with a fraction of the labor and in a fraction of the time. This is why the geography of so many ancient megaprojects is inseparable from a major water source. The Egyptian pyramids rise from the desert plateau, yes, but look at a map, and you will see they are perched precisely at the edge of the floodplain, within easy reach of canals dug from the Nile. The stones were not dragged across the desert from the river, they were floated to the very base of the construction site during the annual inundation, when the water's reach was at its greatest. The Nile was not just nearby, it was the central logistical component, a liquid conveyor belt that brought the mountains to the building site. This principle was understood and replicated across the world. The Romans, masters of pragmatic engineering, did not just use existing rivers, they created new ones to serve their architectural ambitions. To bring dazzling white marble from the quarries at Carrara to the heart of Rome for projects like the Pantheon, they built dedicated canals. They would load massive marble blocks onto barges at the coast, sail south, then transfer them to a network of canals that cut inland, bringing the stone right into the bustling heart of the capital. While the wheel was not used for transport, the power of water was certainly harnessed. The sprawling city with its massive pyramids of the sun and moon, is located in a valley. Researchers have theorized that a network of canals, possibly using the natural flow from nearby springs and the San River, could have been used to move the volcanic stone and rubble that forms the core of these structures, turning the landscape itself into a hydraulic building system. Mastering these waterways was a technological feat in itself, a hidden cornerstone of architectural ambition that required a suite of sophisticated supporting skills. It demanded advanced boat building to create vessels robust enough to handle multi-ton stones yet shallow enough to navigate canals and river mouths. It required profound hydrological knowledge, an understanding of seasonal currents, flood cycles, and water depths to plan the movement of these precious, irreplaceable loads. A mistake in timing could mean a barge laden with a cornerstone running aground for an entire season. It also necessitated political and military control, securing key ports, river mouths, and canal junctions from disruption or piracy. The safe passage of a stone for a temple was as strategically important as the passage of grain for an army. This made naval and riverine capability not merely a commercial advantage, but a direct prerequisite for monumental construction. A civilization that could command the water could command the stone, and thereby command the skyline. But even the most generous river has its end, and the final leg of the journey often presented the most grueling puzzle of all, the point where water met earth, and the monumental block had to be convinced to move across solid ground. So the barge arrives, its precious cargo of stone finally resting at the riverbank or the canal terminus. This moment marks a critical transition, the handoff from the fluid efficiency of water to the grueling inch-by-inch reality of land. Here, the network faced its ultimate test of raw physics. This was the Overland Challenge, a realm defined by friction, gravity, and the sheer stubbornness of the earth. When the convenient highway of water ran out, builders had to invent one, carving temporary roads out of the landscape itself, transforming the final miles into a monumental effort all their own. This phase of the journey was not about elegant navigation. It was about brute force logistics, a symphony of coordinated muscle, simple machines, and relentless patience. The most iconic image of this struggle is the pyramid ramp. While scholars debate their exact form, whether they were straight, zigzagging, or wrapped around the structure's sides, their purpose is unmistakable. They were temporary mountains built to move other mountains. Constructed from rubble and compacted earth, these ramps were essentially massive, sloping work platforms. They turned the vertical climb of the pyramid's rising courses into a manageable, gradual incline. Imagine teams of laborers, not hauling a block straight up a 90-degree face, but pulling it along a steady, packed dirt slope, perhaps with the aid of wooden sledges wetted to reduce friction. The ramp was a classic trade-off, an immense investment in secondary construction to enable the primary one. It was disposable infrastructure on a colossal scale, built only to be dismantled once the capstone was set, its materials perhaps recycled for the next project. This temporary nature is key. It shows how these networks were dynamic, their pathways evolving with the project's own growth. But ramps were just the final, dramatic ascent. The journey to the ramp space could be just as complex. This required the creation of a haul road, a prepared track leading from the offloading point to the construction site. This was not merely a cleared path, it was an engineered surface. For moving truly massive stones, like the multi-hundred-ton megaliths found at places like Baalbek in Lebanon or within the Egyptian temples, builders would create a road of wooden tracks. They laid parallel lines of sturdy timber beams into the ground, creating a stable railway of sorts. The stone block, mounted on a heavy wooden sledge, would then be pulled along these greased tracks, with teams of workers constantly moving the rear beams to the front as the sledge advanced. It was a painstaking, cyclical process, a slow-motion conveyor belt made of human effort and lumber. Animal power provided the essential muscle for these hauling operations, where geography and culture allowed. In the ancient Near East and the Mediterranean, oxen were the diesel engines of the ancient world. Their slow, powerful pull was ideal for moving heavy, inertial loads. Donkeys and mules handled lighter stones or served in trains to transport food and tools along the supply lines. In South and Southeast Asia, elephants were incorporated into the network, their immense strength and intelligence making them uniquely suited for positioning large stones and timbers. The use of animals introduced another layer to the logistics network, a need for fodder, water, veterinary care, and handlers, essentially creating a mobile, living component of the supply chain that itself required sustenance. The Overland network was, at its heart, an exercise in terrain modification. It was about convincing the landscape to cooperate. This meant more than just laying down tracks. It could involve leveling undulating ground, filling in dips, and building causeways across marshy areas. In some cases, like the famous stone roads of the Inca or the grand processional ways of Mesopotamia, these construction routes evolved into permanent ceremonial roads, their practical origins giving way to spiritual significance. Along these routes, builders established resting stations, places where teams could be relieved, sledges repaired, and animals watered. These waypoints were the pulse points of the Overland network, ensuring the slow, steady rhythm of the haul could be maintained day after day, month after month. The efficiency of this final Overland leg was the bottleneck that determined the entire project's pace. A water journey of 100 miles might be completed in a week, but moving a stone the last 2 miles from the river to the site could take months. This calculus forced ingenious adaptations. At the Olmec site of La Venta in ancient Mexico, where colossal basalt heads were transported over 60 miles from their source, researchers believe the builders may have waited for the seasonal flooding of rivers to get the stones as close as possible, minimizing the brutal overland trek through swamps and jungle. Every culture developed its own toolkit of solutions, from the lever and fulcrum systems used to nudge stones into precise positions, to the use of rounded stone balls as primitive bearings placed beneath sledges. Each method was a local answer to the universal problem of friction, a testament to human ingenuity in the face of immovable objects. The success of this terrestrial puzzle, solving geography through effort, is what finally allowed the isolated stone, born in a distant quarry, to take its appointed place in the rising monument, locking into a story far greater than itself. Now picture the scene at the quarry we just described. The workers have their sledges and rollers, the path is prepared, but they are not moving. They are waiting. They are waiting for a signal, for an instruction, for the answer to a simple but critical question. Which block goes next? This moment of stillness reveals the invisible architecture that made everything else possible. The physical network of roads and ramps was merely the skeleton. What gave it life, what made it move with purpose, was a parallel web of information, a nervous system of administration and communication that spanned the entire realm. Without this organizational blueprint, the entire endeavor would have collapsed into chaos, a traffic jam of epic proportions lasting generations. The challenge was staggering. A central authority, perhaps a pharaoh's court or a temple priesthood, had to coordinate activities across hundreds of miles and multiple specialized groups. Quarry masters in the mountains needed to know the exact dimensions for the next batch of column drums. Ship captains on the Nile required manifests telling them where to dock their precious cargo. Foremen at the construction site had to schedule the labor gangs so that when materials arrived, there were hands ready to unload and place them. How do you synchronize all of this without telephones, without email, without even a reliable postal service? The solution was a human and documentary network, a bureaucracy born of necessity. At the heart of this system was the scribe. In ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, and later in Rome and China, the scribe was not just a recorder, he was a linchpin. His tools were simple, a reed stylus, a tablet of wet clay, or a sheet of papyrus. But his function was profoundly modern. He was a logistics coordinator, an accountant, and a quality assurance officer all in one. We have tangible proof of this from sites like ancient Mesopotamia, where thousands of clay tablets have survived in the baked ruins of administrative buildings. These are not epic poems or royal decrees. They are work orders, delivery receipts, and payroll records. One tablet might meticulously list the daily barley rations issued to work gangs building a ziggurat. Another might record the receipt of 50 timbers of length from a named forester in a distant province. This was the paperwork of empire, and it was absolutely vital. It created accountability. A quarry master could not claim he sent the wrong stone if his own signed tablet the order. A ship's captain was responsible for the cargo listed on his manifest. This documentation transformed trust from a fragile personal bond into a system that could function across vast distances and between people who had never met. Supporting the scribes was a corps of messengers. These were the data packets of the ancient world, carrying tablets, scrolls, and oral instructions along established routes. In the Inca Empire, a network of relay runners known as could carry a quipu, a knotted string recording device, over hundreds of miles in a matter of days by passing the message from one runner to the next at way stations. In the Roman world, the state-run courier and transportation service used a system of waypoints with fresh horses and riders to ensure official communications moved swiftly along the famed Roman roads. The speed and reliability of this messaging network determined the responsiveness of the entire project. A delay in reporting a quarry collapse or a shipwreck could cause cascading failures at the build site, leaving thousands of workers idle and consuming precious stockpiled food. Perhaps the most subtle yet critical innovation was the standardization of measures. Imagine the disaster if the quarry in the north cut stones to a local cubit measurement, only for the masons at the temple site to be using a slightly shorter royal cubit. The blocks would not fit. To prevent this, central authorities imposed standardized units of length, volume, and weight. Royal cubit rods made of granite were distributed as physical references. Standardized baskets were used for measuring grain rations. This allowed instructions to be written and understood uniformly across the network. A work order could simply state 10 blocks of 20 royal cubits, and everyone from the quarryman to the site architect knew exactly what was required. This standardization was a form of silent communication, a shared language of dimension that ensured interoperability across the entire supply chain. This administrative layer did more than just prevent errors, it enabled prediction and planning. By keeping detailed records of past projects, scribes could estimate how much stone a quarry could produce per month, how much food 1,000 laborers consumed in a week, and how long a river journey took at different seasons of the year. This data allowed for rudimentary forecasting. They could project when they would run out of limestone and needed to order more from the next quarry. They could schedule the arrival of grain shipments from the farmlands to coincide with the peak labor periods. This transformed the monumental project from a reactive scramble into a managed pipeline. Materials and labor began to flow with a rhythm, a predictability that was the hallmark of a sophisticated state. The true monument, therefore, was not just the pyramid of stone, but the pyramid of information that was built first, a flawless organizational model that made the physical dream a logistical reality. Now consider the immense cost of that flawless organizational system we just described. The scribes needed wages, the messengers required food and shelter, the quarries demanded tools, and the laborers consumed vast quantities of grain and beer. None of this happened by goodwill alone. Sprawling physical and administrative networks we have mapped out required a financial engine, a way to convert a society's collective wealth into stone and sweat. This brings us to the economic underpinnings, the powerful and often coercive systems that funded these dreams in stone, tribute, trade, and currency. These were not just payment methods, they were the very mechanisms of empire, the means by which value was harvested from a wide landscape and funneled toward a single, awe-inspiring point. Let us start with the most direct method, tribute. When a powerful state expanded its territory, conquest was often followed by a systematic demand for resources. This was not random looting, but a formalized extraction. The conquered province would be required to send a regular quota of goods to the capital. This could be raw materials like timber from Lebanon for Egypt or silver from Spanish mines for Rome. It could also be finished products, like the exquisite textiles some Andean cultures owed to the Inca. For a monumental construction project, this tributary system acted like a ready-made supply chain. The central authority did not need to negotiate or trade, it simply issued an order. The famous Roman appetite for colored marble provides a perfect example. Emperors, seeking to adorn their forums and baths with the finest stone, would command provinces like Egypt for imperial purple porphyry, or modern-day Turkey for shimmering white marble from quarries like those at. This marble was not bought on an open market, it was claimed as a right of rule. The network of transport existed, but the economic transaction was one of power, a physical manifestation of dominance where the very landscape of the conquered land was literally carved up and shipped home to glorify the conqueror. But not all resources came from subjugated lands. For materials beyond an empire's borders or for internal transactions, directed trade and early currencies came into play. Directed trade is where the state actively controls or monopolizes the exchange of certain key commodities. In ancient Egypt, the procurement of cedar from Lebanon likely operated through such a system. Royal expeditions, led by high officials, would travel to the Phoenician ports not as simple merchants, but as representatives of pharaonic power. They would bring goods highly valued by the Lebanese, such as gold, papyrus, and linen, in a state-sponsored barter exchange. The economy here is managed, the term set by the crown to ensure a steady flow of that critical resource. In other cases, the need to facilitate these complex, large-scale exchanges spurred the development of more formal currency. While not money as we know it today, standardized ingots of metal, like the copper oxide ingots of the Mediterranean Bronze Age, served as a proto-currency. These ingots had a recognized value and could be stored, transported, and used to pay for goods and services across different regions, smoothing the path for resources to travel along the network. They were a tool of economic integration, making it easier to pay a ship's crew from another city or to compensate a community for the timber taken from their hills. Perhaps the most personal economic mechanism, however, was the levy of labor itself, known in many cultures as labor. This was a tax paid not in grain or silver, but in time and muscle. For a certain period each year, often during the agricultural off-season, citizens or subjects were obligated to work on state projects. This could mean hauling stones for a pyramid, digging canals for transport, or serving as a porter on a royal road. The economic principle here is profound. The state is directly converting its human capital into monumental infrastructure. The worker's sustenance, the food and drink we discussed earlier, becomes the primary cost. This system leveraged the existing social structure and belief system. In Egypt, it was often framed as service to the god-king, a religious duty. In the Inca Empire, it was part of a reciprocal agreement with the state, which in return provided security and organized welfare in times of need. The network, in this case, is fed by a river of human obligation, a current of mandated service that flows from every village toward the center. The economic transaction is abstract but incredibly powerful, trading civic or religious duty for a share in eternal glory. A pyramid that bears, in some invisible way, the fingerprint of an entire nation's collective labor. So when we stand before a great ancient monument, we are not just looking at clever engineering or artistic skill. We are looking at the frozen end product of a colossal economic machine. We are seeing marble that was a tribute payment from a restless province, cedar that was traded for Nubian gold, stones moved by farmers fulfilling their annual duty to the crown. The monument is the ultimate concentration of wealth, but not just gold and silver wealth. It is the concentrated wealth of political will, of controlled trade routes, of human time levied as tax. The long-distance resource network was the circulatory system, but tribute, trade, and currency were the heart, pumping the lifeblood of economic value across the realm to give that single, silent stone edifice a heartbeat. To truly grasp the immense, living reality of these ancient supply chains, let us zoom in from the abstract principles of economics and power to a single, breathtaking location and the extraordinary journey of the material that made it possible. Picture the great hypostyle hall in the Karnak temple complex, a forest of stone made by human hands. 134 columns, the largest of them soaring 70 feet high, with capitals so wide that 100 people could stand upon one. The effect is overwhelming, designed to make a visitor feel infinitesimally small before the divine. But to create this stone forest, the ancient Egyptians first needed a real forest, and not just any trees. They needed cedar from the mountains of Lebanon, a resource separated from the building site by over 1,000 miles of open sea and harsh coastline. This was not a local procurement. This was an international operation, a precise and perilous network in motion, and it reveals every layer of the logistical challenge we have been discussing. The story begins not in the Egyptian desert, but in the moist, cool highlands of Lebanon, where the famed cedars of Lebanon grew tall and straight, with a wood that was aromatic, resistant to rot, and incredibly strong. For the Egyptians, whose native timber was mostly palm and acacia, short, knotty, and unsuitable for massive beams, this Lebanese cedar was a material of dreams. But it was more than just practical. Its sweet, enduring scent was associated with the gods and with purity. Using it in a temple was a spiritual act, an infusion of sacred geography into the architecture. So the need was both engineering and theology, a combination that justified an almost unimaginable effort. The first link in this network was diplomatic and commercial. The Egyptians did not simply sail to Lebanon and start chopping. They engaged with the masters of the Levantan coast, the Phoenicians, who acted as expert middlemen. The Phoenicians possessed the local knowledge, the logging skills, and the initial maritime capacity. Egyptian records, like the famed story of the Official, describe complex negotiations for wood involving exchanges of gold, silver, linen, and papyrus. This was the directed trade system in action, a state-sponsored acquisition where Pharaoh's envoys traded the manufactured wealth of the Nile for the raw, divine material of the mountains. Once a deal was struck, the most dangerous phase began, the maritime journey. The Egyptians had to mount what were essentially naval expeditions. They would send a fleet of ships across the eastern Mediterranean, a sea known for sudden storms. These were not simple river barges, but robust seagoing vessels capable of carrying colossal cargo. After a voyage that could take weeks, the ships would land on the Lebanese coast. There, the massive felled logs, each potentially over 100 feet long, would be rolled into the water, lashed together into rafts, or loaded directly onto the ships. Imagine the scene, the bustling temporary port, the shouts of workers, the sea thick with these floating islands of precious timber, beginning their slow, vulnerable voyage back to Egypt. Upon reaching an Egyptian port, like near modern-day Tel El, the network transitioned from maritime to fluvial and overland. The giant logs were transferred to the Nile's tributaries or canals, towed by boats against the current, a slower but far more efficient method than any cart. They would travel south, deep into the heart of Egypt, finally reaching a dock near the sacred site of Thebes. From there, the final overland haul to Karnak itself began, using the same systems of sledges, rollers, and human labor used for stone. It was a relay race across geography, where the baton was a tree trunk, passed from Phoenician lumberjacks to Egyptian sailors to riverboat crews, and finally to the construction gangs at the temple site. And then the final transformation occurred. The cedar logs were not used as simple pillars. Their primary role was as the hidden skeletal framework for those gigantic stone columns. They served as massive central beams, the internal scaffolding around which the stone drums were stacked and secured. They were the hidden strength within the stone, the flexible wooden spine that gave the whole structure resilience. Specialized carpenters, whose skills were as mobile and valuable as the wood itself, would have shaped and fitted these logs with joinery perfected over generations. The network, therefore, delivered not just a raw material, but the very possibility of a specific architectural form. Without that long-distance pipeline of Lebanese cedar, the hypostyle hall as we know it, with its staggering height and spacious interior, simply could not have been built. So when you stand in the shadow of those columns at Karnak, you are not just in an Egyptian temple. You are standing in a monument built by a network that spanned the Mediterranean. You are smelling, even after, the faint, imagined scent of Lebanese mountains in an Egyptian desert. You are witnessing the physical convergence of diplomacy, maritime courage, riverine logistics, and sacred artistry. This single case study crystallizes everything: the pool of exotic resources, the complexity of multi-stage transport, the role of specialized middlemen, and the translation of raw material into divine space. The hall is a testament to stone, yes, but it is a monument first to the cedar, and to the incredible human chain that brought it home. Now let us journey from the sun-drenched temples of the Nile to the mist-shrouded tombs of ancient China, where an even more ethereal and spiritually charged material defined the networks of power and eternity: jade. While the Egyptian network sought colossal logs for structural might, the Chinese imperial quest was for a stone of profound symbolic density, one that held the very key to immortality. For China's ruling elite, particularly during the Han Dynasty, gold was a mere metal, but jade was the physical embodiment of virtue, purity, and the enduring soul. Its cool, luminous beauty was believed to possess magical properties, capable of preserving the body and safeguarding the spirit in the afterlife. This was not decoration. This was spiritual armor, and securing it required a network that stretched across some of the most forbidding geography on Earth. The focal point of this need is the magnificent tomb of Prince Sheng, from the 2nd century before the Common Era. His resting place, discovered in the 20th century, provides a stunning testament to this jade ideology. Archaeologists found the prince clad from head to toe in a suit composed of over 2,400 small rectangular plates of jade, meticulously sewn together with threads of gold. This jade burial suit was a literal cocoon of sacred stone, a vessel designed to grant the occupant eternal incorruptibility. The sheer quantity of flawless, worked jade in this single suit alone represents a staggering investment of material and artistry. But where did it all come from? The answer lies over 1,000 miles to the west, in the remote, rugged region of Xinjiang, home to the legendary mines of and Yarkand, nestled in the foothills of the mountains. This geographical reality presents a logistical puzzle of a different flavor than the Egyptian cedar trade. Between the fertile, ordered central plains of China and the distant jade sources lay an almost unimaginable barrier. The desert, whose very name whispers a warning, often translated as place of no return. This was not a sea that could be sailed. It was a vast, shifting ocean of sand dunes, scorching by day and freezing by night, haunted by howling winds and devoid of water. Skirting its edges were the Shan and mountain ranges, their passes treacherous and snowbound. To connect the source to the consumer, a network had to not only cross this hellscape, but do so reliably enough to deliver a continuous flow of a precious, ritually necessary commodity. The solution was not a construction supply chain built from scratch, but the brilliant co-opting and supercharging of a pre-existing organic system, the oasis routes. For centuries, small-scale local trade had already been connecting the dots between isolated watering holes at the desert's rim. Merchants and travelers moved in short, perilous hops from one oasis to the next, carrying silk, spices, and other goods. The imperial demand for jade transformed these tentative trails into an official, maintained, and heavily trafficked corridor, the direct precursor to what would become the northern branch of the Silk Road. The Chinese state, under the ambitious Emperor Wu of Han, actively secured these routes, establishing protectorates and garrisoning oasis towns to safeguard the flow of jade. Thus, the needs of monumental tomb construction directly catalyzed the formalization of transcontinental trade infrastructure. Imagine the journey of a single block of raw jade. It begins in a riverbed in the mountains, where workers, perhaps local tribespeople, harvest the nephrite stones from alluvial deposits. This raw, unassuming rock is then loaded onto the backs of Bactrian camels, the only beasts of burden capable of surviving the long desert marches. A caravan master, leading a train of dozens of these animals, would then plot a course from oasis to oasis, a navigation based on ancient knowledge of hidden water sources and landmarks. The travel was slow, perhaps only 15 miles a day, and fraught with danger from bandits, sandstorms, and the ever-present threat of getting lost. After months of this grueling travel, the caravan would finally reach the western frontiers of Han territory at outposts like. Here, the network transitioned. The raw jade was transferred to state officials, logged into imperial inventories, and then began the next phase of its journey eastward along more established roads and rivers into the heart of the empire, towards the capital workshops. In specialized ateliers, master artisans who had trained for a lifetime would begin the agonizingly slow work of transforming the rough stone into the polished plates for a burial suit, or the intricate discs and tubes used in rituals. Using abrasives like quartz sand and simple bow-driven drills, they would shape the incredibly tough nephrite, a process that could take years for a single large item. This was a network of patience, where the time invested in transport was matched by the time invested in craftsmanship. The Jade Network, therefore, reveals a fascinating contrast to the Cedar Network. While both moved sacred materials over vast distances, the Egyptian system was a point-to-point state enterprise for a specific, singular project need. The Chinese Jade Network was more like tapping into and amplifying a capillary system that then fed a continuous, empire-wide demand spanning centuries. It was less about a single construction site and more about supplying an entire ideological and funerary culture. The tombs were the final destination, but the jade they required helped forge the very roads that would later carry silk, Buddhism, and ideas across Asia. In this way, the spiritual quest for immortality through stone did not just build tombs, it helped build the interconnected world. The silent jade suit of Prince Sheng is more than a marvel of ancient art. It is a map, woven in stone and gold, of a determination so powerful it dared to stitch an empire together across a sea of sand. This brings us to a resource far more potent than timber, stone, or jade, a force that could move mountains without touching them, the power of shared belief. While we have traced the physical arteries that carried materials across continents, we must now uncover the invisible current that animated them, the spiritual fuel that made such staggering human investment not just possible, but passionately pursued. Consider the sheer psychology of the endeavor. For a farmer to leave his fields for months, or for a community to surrender its harvest, its young men, and its timber to a project they might never see completed, there had to be a reason stronger than any royal decree. That reason was often a deeply held, unifying ideology that transformed backbreaking labor into sacred service and justified the extraction of resources as an offering to a higher order. The most direct manifestation of this is seen in the very identity of the ruler. In countless ancient societies, from the pharaohs of Egypt to the emperors of China and the god-kings of, the monarch was not merely a political leader but a divine intermediary, the literal embodiment of a god on earth, or the soul link between the people and the cosmic forces that governed rain, sun, and fertility. Constructing a pyramid, a ziggurat, or a vast temple was therefore not building a tomb or a palace. It was participating in the maintenance of cosmic order itself. The labor hauling a stone for the pharaoh's pyramid was not serving a man, but helping to ensure the sun god Ra would continue his journey across the sky, guaranteeing another day, another season, another harvest for everyone. This belief system provided an all-encompassing why that made the how bearable. It converted economic extraction and labor conscription from mere oppression into a collective religious duty, a shared investment in the stability of the universe. This spiritual framework had a profound and practical effect on the logistics networks we have been mapping. Pilgrimage routes offer a perfect example of this synergy. Roads leading to sacred sites, like those to the Oracle at Delphi in Greece or to the great Hindu temple complexes in India, were not just paths for devotees. They were meticulously maintained highways that, during periods of monumental construction, effortlessly doubled as supply roads. The same infrastructure that carried pilgrims bearing offerings could carry stones, timber, and tools. The faithful traveling to a site for a festival might find themselves walking alongside ox carts laden with building materials, all part of the same continuum of devotion. The network gained a layer of sanctity, and consequently, a degree of protection and voluntary maintenance from the communities through which it passed. Furthermore, belief could directly motivate the most challenging leg of transport, the final ceremonial journey from the quarry or dockyard to the sacred site itself. There are accounts, both historical and ethnographic, of stones being moved in a ritualized, processional manner. In some traditions, moving a megalith was not an engineering problem but a religious event. The stone might be draped in cloth, anointed with oils, or accompanied by chants and ceremonies at every stage of its journey. In this context, the act of pulling the rope or levering the sledge became a form of communal prayer, a tangible expression of piety where every inch gained was a spiritual victory. The sweat and strain were not wasted effort. They were the physical currency of faith, an offering as valid as any precious metal. This ideological network also served a crucial social binding function. In empires composed of diverse, recently conquered or geographically scattered peoples, a massive state-sponsored construction project fueled by a shared religious ideology could forge a common identity. Participating in the building of a great cathedral in medieval Europe, for instance, was a way for towns and guilds to demonstrate their piety and integrate into the larger Christian community. In the Andes, the construction of infrastructure and temples under the Inca, who revered the sun god Inti, helped assimilate various ethnic groups into the imperial system, creating a shared experience and a shared sacred landscape. The network, therefore, became a circulatory system for ideology, pumping the central beliefs of the state out to the periphery and drawing physical loyalty back in the form of labor and materials. Ultimately, this dimension forces us to recalibrate our understanding of these ancient supply chains. They were not merely cold, logistical operations, the ancient equivalent of a modern shipping manifest. They were living expressions of a civilization's deepest values and fears. The transport of a cedar log from Lebanon to Egypt was a journey of symbolic power as much as architectural necessity. The movement of jade across the desert was a pilgrimage for material to house an immortal soul. The belief system was the engine that powered the entire machine, the compelling story that convinced thousands to willingly participate in a project whose completion they would never witness. It reminds us that the most enduring monuments are built not just from stone and mortar, but from the powerful, invisible cement of shared conviction. Yet this immense mobilization of faith and logistics came at a price, one that was often paid not at the shining temple site, but in the quiet, distant landscapes where the resources were extracted. Every stone, every tree felled, and every mine opened left a permanent mark on the earth, a hidden environmental ledger balancing the books of human ambition. While we marvel at the enduring beauty of the finished monument, we must also listen to the story told by the scars left behind, a narrative of profound and often unintended transformation, written into the very soil and sediment of regions far from the centers of power. Consider the quarry, the starting point for so many of these stone networks. To us, an ancient quarry might appear as a dramatic landscape of cut cliffs and abandoned monoliths, like the famous site in Aswan, Egypt, home to the Unfinished Obelisk. But the impact extended far beyond the picturesque scar. Quarrying is an invasive process. It requires removing vast amounts of overburden, the soil and rock covering the desired stone layer. This activity completely obliterates the local ecosystem, stripping away plant life and displacing animal habitats in an instant. The debris from this work, the rubble and fine stone dust, would wash into nearby waterways during rains, changing their chemistry and clogging stream beds. This siltation could travel downstream for miles, affecting water quality and agricultural land in communities that may have had no direct connection to the grand project. The quarry site itself often became a barren zone, a literal sacrifice zone where the local environment was exchanged for a symbol of centralized glory. The demand for timber and fuel created perhaps the most widespread and cascading environmental effect. To fire the lime kilns for the mortar of a single medieval cathedral, or to produce the charcoal needed to smelt metal for tools and ornaments, required staggering amounts of wood. We are not talking about clearing a few acres. We are talking about the systematic consumption of entire forests. For example, to construct the monumental roof of Westminster Hall in London in the 14th century, historians estimate that over 400 great oak trees were required, sourced from forests across England. This scale of harvesting did not just change the view, it fundamentally altered local ecologies. Forests are complex regulators. Their roots hold soil in place, their canopies moderate rainfall impact, and they release moisture into the atmosphere. Removing them triggers a domino effect of consequences. With the trees gone, the exposed soil becomes vulnerable. Rain, instead of being intercepted and absorbed, hits the ground directly, washing away the nutrient-rich topsoil in a process called erosion. This eroded soil then finds its way into rivers, a process known as siltation. Rivers become choked with sediment, their beds rise, and their capacity to hold water decreases. This makes flooding more frequent and severe for downstream settlements, a problem far removed from the original construction site. Furthermore, The loss of forest canopy can disrupt local rainfall patterns and reduce groundwater recharge, potentially turning once fertile areas into drier, less productive landscapes. The search for specific high-quality timber, like the famed cedar of Lebanon, could target a single species to the point of local extinction, simplifying and weakening entire forest ecosystems for generations. The monument, therefore, cast a long shadow, one measured in muddy rivers, degraded farms, and forests across a wide geographical radius. We can even see this legacy in the search for more specialized resources. The intensive mining for copper, tin, and other metals left behind landscapes pockmarked with pits and tunnels, often contaminated with heavy metals from the smelting process. Tailings, the waste material from ore processing, could leach acids and toxins into groundwater, poisoning water sources long after the mine was abandoned. The quest for exotic materials like ivory or certain colorful feathers for ornamentation could place unsustainable pressure on animal populations, driving them away from traditional ranges or contributing to their decline in certain regions. These networks, designed to funnel life and energy toward a single point, often acted as agents of depletion and disruption at their many points of origin. The remarkable aspect of this ancient environmental impact is that we can still read its history today, not in written records, but in the earth itself. Scientists use a technique called palynology, the study of ancient pollen grains preserved in lakebed and bog sediments. By taking core samples from the bottom of a lake near a suspected ancient construction zone, researchers can analyze the layers of mud, each representing a different period in time. A sudden, dramatic drop in tree pollen and a corresponding rise in pollen from weeds and grasses is a clear signal of large-scale deforestation. Similarly, layers of coarse sediment in river delta cores can indicate periods of intense erosion from upland areas, often correlating with known periods of massive construction activity. These natural archives tell a story that official histories often ignore. The story of the landscape itself, recording the moment when human ambition reached such a scale that it began to rewrite the ecological rules of entire regions. This perspective forces a complex reconsideration of what we mean by a monument's legacy. The legacy is not only the inspiring structure that stands for, it is also the altered river course 100 miles away, the lost forest on a distant hillside, and the changed composition of species in a valley. These networks were engines of change, and their exhaust was ecological transformation. They demonstrate that even in a world without industrial machinery, concentrated human effort could enact environmental change on a regional scale, creating a hidden cost that was borne by the land itself. This silent exchange between a civilization's pinnacle and its peripheral landscapes reminds us that every great human achievement exists within a delicate balance, and the true footprint of our ambitions is often far larger than the foundation upon which we build. But these networks did far more than simply move rocks and timber from point A to point B. They acted as the ancient world's nervous system, carrying something even more transformative than physical cargo: ideas. The relentless demands of monumental construction became a powerful engine for technological innovation, and the very routes established to haul materials became the primary channels through which these breakthroughs spread across cultures and continents. This turns our entire understanding of these supply lines upside down. They were not just logistical pathways, they were vibrant corridors of learning, where the most advanced practical knowledge of the era was shared, adapted, and improved upon in real time. Consider the challenge of shaping a granite block destined for a pharaoh's temple. Granite is brutally hard. The initial tools and techniques used in one quarry might be painfully slow, involving pounding the stone with even harder dolerite hammers and grinding it with sand. Now, imagine that through a trade network, a group of stonemasons acquires a new type of bronze chisel with a slightly different alloy mix, one that holds a sharper edge longer. Or perhaps they learn a new technique for drilling, using a hollow reed with sand and water to create precise holes for levering. This knowledge doesn't appear by magic, it travels with people. A specialist artisan, perhaps seeking better pay or commission for a specific project, journeys from one major construction site to another along established supply routes. In his toolkit, he carries not just his chisels, but his entire mental library of techniques. At the new site, local workers observe his methods. Conversations happen around campfires and in workshops. The new, more efficient technique is seen, understood, and adopted. Suddenly, the quarry's output increases. That single innovation, born from necessity in one region, now flows along the network, upgrading the capabilities of every community it touches. This diffusion is strikingly visible in maritime technology. Transporting 100-ton obelisks or gigantic cedar logs required vessels of unprecedented size and stability. The need to move such cargo safely across open water, whether on the Nile, the Mediterranean, or the coastal waters of Southeast Asia, pushed boat building to its limits. A design breakthrough in hull construction, or sail rigging, developed for moving stone in the eastern Mediterranean, could be observed by Phoenician traders, who then incorporated those improvements into their own famed ships. These better ships could then carry heavier loads farther and faster, which in turn made even more ambitious construction projects conceivable. The network creates a positive feedback loop. Ambitious projects demand better transport enables more ambitious projects, and the knowledge of how to build that transport spreads along the very trade lanes it serves. The monumental construction site becomes a living exposition of cutting-edge engineering, a place where the best solutions from a wide geography are physically assembled and put on display for any attentive observer. The mixing of materials themselves forced innovation and spread new formulas. Take mortar, the glue that holds masonry together. The Romans perfected a revolutionary material, hydraulic concrete that could even set underwater. This secret was in the mixture, using volcanic ash from a specific region called Pozzolana. As the Roman Empire expanded its construction projects, building harbors, aqueducts, and amphitheaters from Britain to Syria, the knowledge of how to produce this concrete traveled with the legions and their engineers. But here's the fascinating part. In a new province, they might not have access to the exact same volcanic ash. This forced local adaptation. Engineers experimented with locally available materials, perhaps different types of crushed brick or other reactive ashes, to achieve a similar effect. This process of substitution and experimentation, sparked by the imported Roman knowledge, could lead to new, locally optimized formulas. The network delivered the core idea, the principle of a hydraulic binder, and then local conditions and ingenuity refined it, creating new branches of technological knowledge. Perhaps the most profound diffusion was in the realm of organization and measurement itself. The colossal logistics of these projects required a common language of planning. How do you tell a quarry master 200 miles away to cut a column to exact specifications so it fits perfectly upon arrival? This necessitated the development and spread of standardized units of measurement. The royal cubit in Egypt, the Roman foot, or the precise modular systems used in Chinese timber architecture. These standards had to be communicated and enforced across the network. Officials and scribes, carrying standardized measuring rods and tablets of accounts, traveled these routes, ensuring that a block cut in a distant quarry would match the space waiting for it at the temple site. This bureaucratic technology, the very idea of mass production and interchangeable parts on a monumental scale, was a conceptual innovation that spread just as surely as any tool. It taught diverse cultures how to think about precision, planning, and large-scale coordination, lessons that would benefit every other aspect of their society, from taxation to military organization. In this light, the great construction sites of the ancient world, Giza, Angkor, Persepolis, can be seen as the Silicon Valleys of their day. They were magnetic hubs that attracted the minds and most skilled hands from a vast area. They were places where problems were intensely focused, funding was relatively unlimited, and failure was not an option. This environment is a perfect incubator for innovation. The solutions developed under such pressure, whether a new type of pulley system, an improved method for truing a stone surface, or a novel accounting system to track 10,000 workers, did not stay locked within that one project. They seeped outwards, carried home by returning laborers, traded by merchants, and documented by visiting scholars. The resource network ensured that a breakthrough in lifting mechanics at a Greek temple could eventually influence techniques at a Celtic, or that the canal lock technology developed to move stone in China could find applications in agriculture elsewhere. This constant, slow-motion exchange of practical knowledge, accelerated by the shared goal of building the impossible, quietly elevated the technological baseline of entire civilizations, proving that the true foundation of progress is often built not in isolation, but through connection. Yet for all their sophistication, these sprawling systems of supply and knowledge possessed a critical vulnerability. They were not indestructible. Like any complex machine, a single broken gear or a severed connection could bring the entire operation to a grinding, permanent halt. To truly appreciate the monumental achievements of the past, we must also confront their dramatic failures, the ghostly projects frozen in time that reveal just how fragile these vast networks truly were. One of the most powerful and poignant examples lies in Egypt, at the granite quarries of Aswan. Here, embedded in the living rock, rests the so-called Unfinished Obelisk. Had it been completed, it would have been the largest single piece of stone ever carved by human hands, a needle of solid granite reaching over 130 feet into the sky. But it never left its bed. As workers chiseled the outline and began to undercut it from the bedrock, a devastating flaw appeared, a series of cracks spiderwebbing through the precious stone. At that moment, the entire network leading from this quarry to a distant temple site was rendered useless. The years of labor, the planning of transport, the preparation of the foundation, all of it depended on the flawless extraction of this one piece of material. The fracture in the stone represented a catastrophic fracture in the supply chain itself. It shows us that the network was only as strong as its weakest physical link, and that the authority commanding such a project, perhaps a pharaoh whose will was absolute, could be thwarted by the immutable laws of geology. The obelisk remains a monument not to success, but to ambition's stark encounter with reality, a silent lesson in risk management written in stone. But the failure of a single project is one thing. The collapse of an entire network supporting multiple monuments reveals a far more systemic crisis. Across the ocean, in the lush rainforests of the Maya civilization, we find towering pyramids that were abruptly abandoned, their summits left jagged, their final facades never applied. For decades, the focus was on dramatic theories for this collapse: warfare, invasion, or catastrophic natural disaster. Yet modern archaeology paints a subtler, and in many ways more instructive, picture. The Maya world was intricately connected by trade networks that moved not just luxury goods, but absolute essentials for daily life and large-scale construction. One of the most critical was the flow of obsidian, a volcanic glass sharper than modern surgical steel, which was the primary material for cutting tools, from everyday knives to the chisels used to shape limestone blocks. Another was salt, vital for preserving the fish and meat that fed the concentrated labor forces at urban construction sites. These goods often came from specialized regions, sometimes hundreds of miles apart. As political instability grew, as conflicts between city-states intensified, these long-distance exchange routes began to fray and then snap. A city might find its supply of obsidian for tools or salt for its workers' food suddenly cut off. The immediate effect would be a slowdown, then a halt in construction. But the ripple effects were profound. Without the network, the social and economic glue that held the ceremonial center together dissolved. The skilled artisans, dependent on imported materials, would have no work. The laborers, no longer fed by centralized stores, would disperse. The pyramid, half finished, would become a symbol not of divine power, but of a broken system. The monument didn't fail because people stopped believing in the gods it honored. It failed because the practical, earthly network that sustained its creation had vanished. The pyramid's abandonment was not the cause of the collapse, but one of its most visible symptoms. These breakdowns teach us a crucial, humbling lesson. We often marvel at the finished product, the pyramid or temple that stands defiant against time. But these successes represent moments of perfect alignment, when geological fortune, political stability, economic surplus, and environmental conditions all converge to allow the network to function at peak capacity. The failures show us the opposite, the moments when that delicate alignment shattered. A political revolution could sever the administrative network of scribes and overseers, leaving quarries without orders and shipments without destinations. A prolonged drought, as some evidence suggests for the Maya, could devastate the agricultural backbone of the sustenance network, turning the flow of grain to the workers into a trickle and then nothing. A shift in trade routes, perhaps due to the rise of a new power or the discovery of a better resource elsewhere, could leave a once vital quarry or forest depot isolated and forgotten. Even something as simple as a new leader with different priorities could starve a project of funding and attention, causing the intricate machine of logistics to rust from disuse. In every case, the stone itself is patient. It will wait in the quarry, on the sled, or half-dressed on the building site for centuries. It is the human network, the fragile living web of cooperation, communication, and shared purpose, that is ephemeral. When that network dissolved, the ambition it carried dissolved with it, leaving behind skeletal frameworks and silent stones as testimony to a system that once pulsed with coordinated life. These haunting sites force us to see the finished wonders of the world not as inevitable triumphs, but as narrow victories snatched from a universe of potential failure, reminding us that civilization itself is a continuous act of maintenance, of keeping the networks that sustain us intact against countless pressures to let them fall apart. This fundamental difference in available technology created a fascinating divergence in the very logic of their logistics. In Eurasia and Africa, the domestication of animals like oxen, donkeys, and later camels and horses introduced a powerful multiplier effect. A single ox could pull a load on a sled or cart that would require a dozen or more human porters. The invention of the wheel, though not universally used even in the Old World, further amplified this efficiency on prepared roads. This meant that Old World networks could contemplate moving truly gargantuan individual objects over considerable distances. The famous story of the Lateran obelisk being transported from Egypt to Rome speaks to this capacity. After a perilous Mediterranean voyage, it was dragged through the streets of Rome on a massive sled pulled by hundreds of oxen, a spectacle of animal-powered logistics. The network here was built around these beasts, requiring not just roads, but also forage stations, veterinary knowledge, and handlers. The limit was less about pure human endurance and more about engineering a path sturdy enough for heavy carts and managing large teams of animals. Now cross the Atlantic and envision the landscape of the Americas before European contact. Here, the story is strikingly different. No native beasts of burden like oxen or horses existed for transport. The wheel was known in principle, as evidenced by small wheeled toys found in, but it was never applied to practical transport, likely due to the lack of suitable draft animals and the challenging, often mountainous or jungle terrain. This absence forced a complete reimagining of the supply chain. The primary engine of every network became the human back. In the Aztec Empire, these specialized porters were known as, and they formed the backbone of the state's communication and supply system. Operating in relay teams along maintained roads, could carry a load of about 50 pounds for about 15 miles a day before passing it to the next runner. This created a flowing river of goods where nothing ever stopped moving, from food and textiles to the all-important obsidian and feathers for ceremonial centers. The network was literally a human circulatory system, with its pace set by the rhythm of the human stride and its capacity limited by the calories needed to fuel thousands of porters. This biological limit had a direct and visible impact on the geography of ambition, because moving a single, multi-ton stone block purely by human levering and dragging was exponentially more difficult. Monumental construction in the Americas often displays a different philosophy. There is a tendency towards using smaller, more manageable stone units or towards utilizing locally available materials in brilliant, aggregate ways. Look at the incredible Cedar. Its awe-inspiring beauty comes not from imported megaliths, but from the masterful fitting of countless locally granite blocks. The network here was shorter, focused on the immediate landscape, but no less sophisticated. Labor was organized to quarry, shape, and fit stone on site, minimizing the need for long-distance transport of finished pieces. Similarly, the vast earthen pyramids of Cahokia in North America were built from millions of baskets of locally dug soil, a material gathered by a massive human chain operating just feet from the growing mound. The monument emerged from an intense, localized mobilization of human energy rather than a long line stretching to a distant quarry. Yet to think the Americas lacked long-distance networks for heavy materials would be a serious mistake. They simply mastered a different element, water. Wherever possible, they turned rivers and lakes into their highways. The Maya, for instance, likely used extensive canoe transport along rivers and coastal waters to move volcanic stone for buildings and statues. The city of central Mexico, located far from major stone sources, may have used a network of canals to bring in the volcanic rock that built its pyramids. And in the Andes, the Inca Empire, while masterful at on-site stonework, also used the manpower of thousands to transport special stones for important temples across their royal road system, a testament to the sheer organizational power that could overcome the lack of animal transport. The principle of gathering distant resources remained absolute, but the method was a breathtaking orchestration of human coordination, turning geography into a puzzle solved with ropes, ramps, and rhythmic labor. Placing these two systems side by side does not reveal a hierarchy of success, but rather a spectrum of brilliant human adaptation. The old world, with its animals and wheels, could achieve a certain kind of heavy, concentrated grandeur, moving single objects of staggering weight. The New World, constrained by biology but not by ingenuity, achieved grandeur through multiplication and local mastery, building immense structures from countless smaller parts or by moving people to materials rather than always moving materials to people. Both faced the same core problem: a building site's hunger for more than its surroundings could provide. One solution leveraged animal muscle and rolling carts, the other leveraged human endurance and aquatic paths. Their contrasting networks show us that there is no single blueprint for monumental achievement. Instead, they reveal how culture, environment, and available technology intertwine to shape the very paths of ambition, proving that the human drive to build the impossible will always find a way, whether that way is paved with oxen tracks or with the footprints of countless porters moving in a purposeful, endless line. This mastery of the sea opens up perhaps the most breathtaking chapter in our story of ancient networks. For civilizations born on the shores of islands or along rugged coastlines, the open ocean was not a void to be feared, but the widest, most efficient road they could ever conceive. While land-based networks grinded against mountains and deserts, maritime networks harnessed the wind and current, allowing for the movement of staggering weights across distances that would be unimaginable overland. This was the realm where ambition truly set sail, and the logistical challenges were as deep and shifting as the sea itself. Consider the sheer audacity of the Polynesian voyagers. Their world was the vast Pacific Ocean, an expanse of blue covering nearly a third of our planet. Within this watery wilderness, they pinpointed tiny islands, settled them, and then maintained a living connection between them. Part of that connection involved transporting the very foundations of their sacred landscape. They would sail, often across hundreds of miles of open ocean, to special quarries on distant islands or atolls to obtain specific stones for building their ceremonial platforms. These weren't just any rocks. They were chosen for their type, their color, their spiritual significance. Transporting a multi-ton basalt slab on a double-hulled voyaging canoe is an act of confidence that stuns the modern mind. It required a vessel engineered not just for exploration, but for heavy cargo, a stable catamaran-like design capable of surviving swells with a precious, immobile passenger lashed to its deck. The network here was one of wayfinding, a lattice of star paths, wave patterns, and bird migrations memorized and passed down through generations. Each successful voyage to fetch a stone was a reaffirmation of this knowledge, a physical enactment of their spiritual and ancestral maps. The built from these far-flung stones were thus more than religious sites. They were permanent anchors, tying a new island back to a homeland across the sea, making the invisible network of voyages visible and solid on the shore. Then, of course, there is the haunting example of Easter Island. The iconic, those brooding stone giants, present a maritime network mystery wrapped in a transport puzzle. The soft volcanic tuff for almost all of the nearly 900 statues came from a single quarry in the island's interior, but the journey from quarry to final coastal ahu, or platform, could be up to 15 miles. While the final leg was overland, likely involving a famous rocking walking motion, the true maritime network aspect is subtler and absolutely critical. To erect these colossi, the islanders needed robust timber for levers, sledges, and scaffolding. Evidence suggests that the island was once forested with now-extinct giant palms. The systematic felling of this forest for construction, and crucially, for the logs used to move the statues, represents a different kind of maritime reality. On an isolated island, every resource is finite. The network wasn't bringing timber in from across the sea. Instead, the act of monument construction was consuming the island's own seafaring capacity. The very trees needed to build canoes for fishing and exploration were being sacrificed to move stone. This creates a poignant feedback loop, where the drive to create monuments may have gradually severed the community's connection to the wider maritime network, isolating them further. It's a powerful reminder that these logistical systems existed in a delicate balance with their environment, and a network focused intensely inward on a single goal could, over time, collapse upon itself. The Mediterranean world provides a more classical, but no less impressive, vision of sea-powered megalithic transport. Here, we see the evolution of maritime networks into a tool of imperial expression. The Romans, in their relentless pursuit of majestic grandeur, turned the Mediterranean into a marble highway. They identified quarries of the finest white marble in places like Carrara in Italy and in Greece, and of exotic colored marbles in Egypt, North Africa, and Asia Minor. Their engineering prowess then met their naval might. They developed specialized heavy-duty cargo ships, much wider and sturdier than military vessels, designed to carry dozens of multi-ton column drums or massive carved capitals. Sinking one of these ships, like the famous wreck found off Tunisia, is a time capsule of this network frozen in transit, its hull filled with prefabricated architectural elements. This was logistics on an industrial scale. A single order from the emperor could set in motion a coordinated chain, cutting to precise dimensions in Egypt, laborers loading at the port of Alexandria, sailors navigating the sea lanes, and cranes unloading at the port of Ostia near Rome. The sea allowed Rome to curate its aesthetic, to bring the subdued elegance of Greek marble or the vibrant purple of Egyptian porphyry to its heart, creating a visual language of power assembled from across the waves. The Mediterranean was no longer a separating force between cultures, but a unifying, liquid plaza for the exchange of monumental ideas and the very stones to build them. What united these vastly different seafaring cultures, from the Polynesian navigators to the Roman engineers, was a shared transformation of perspective. They did not see the ocean as empty space. They saw it as a connective tissue. Its currents were predictable roads, its islands were rest stops and resource depots, and its seasonal winds were the engine. Building a monument with stones from across the sea was the ultimate statement of this understanding. It declared that a civilization's influence and its sacred geography did not stop at the shoreline. The network of voyages, the knowledge of how to cross the deep, became a core part of their identity. The monuments they built with these journeyed stones were, in a very real sense, lighthouses of a different kind. They did not warn of danger, but they signaled achievement, marking the endpoint of an incredible journey and standing as permanent proof that for those with the skill and the courage, the sea was the greatest enabler of all. While the ships and carts carried the physical weight of stone and timber, there was another, more subtle cargo traveling those same ancient routes, one that carried the blueprint for greatness in their minds and in their hands. The long-distance networks we have been tracing were not just conduits for inert matter. They were, in a very real sense, the world's first talent pipelines, highways for the most precious resource of all, specialized human skill. Imagine a master stonemason, his tools wrapped in leather, walking the same dusty road that the marble blocks would later travel. He is not carrying stone, but something far more valuable, the exact knowledge of how to transform it. This movement of artisans, these elite craftsmen and engineers, turned the logistical network into a circulatory system, for genius pumping expertise from the heart of an empire out to its farthest frontiers and back again. This phenomenon creates one of the most fascinating fingerprints in the archaeological record, the sudden appearance of a signature style in a place it simply should not be. Take the distant northern edge of the Roman Empire, in a place like Hadrian's Wall in Britain. Here, amidst the damp and the mist, stand the remains of Roman temples and bathhouses. The carved stonework, the specific way a column capital is shaped, the precise curvature of an arch, these details are not rough local imitations. They are executed with a fluency that speaks of deep ingrained training. That training did not come from a manual, it came from a person. A master craftsman, likely from Rome itself or from a major provincial center like Gaul, traveled that immense distance, bringing with him a lifetime of accumulated technique. He would have led a team of local laborers, not just commanding them, but teaching them. Under his direction, local stone was made to speak the architectural language of the Mediterranean. This is how an empire built a cohesive identity. It was not enforced just by soldiers and laws, but by the chisels of migrant masons, creating familiar, imposing beauty in alien landscapes to remind everyone, including the Romans stationed there, of home and of the power that could recreate it anywhere. The mobility of these specialists was often structured and protected by the forerunners of what we would later call guilds or secret societies. These were not formal unions in the modern sense, but close-knit communities of practice. Knowledge was guarded fiercely, passed from master to apprentice in a long, careful chain. The recipes for certain vibrant mortars, the techniques for casting flawless bronze, the methods for setting enormous lintels, these were trade secrets, literal capital. When a major project was commissioned, a call would go out through these networks. A master, perhaps with a team of his most trusted senior apprentices, would agree to travel. Their journey itself was a transfer of intellectual property. As they moved, they might pick up new ideas, see different local methods, and incorporate them into their own practice. This created a beautiful, slow-motion cross-pollination of technology. A stonemason from Egypt working on a project in Anatolia might learn a new quarrying technique, which he would then carry with him to his next job in Greece. The network, therefore, became a living library, with the artisans themselves as the walking, talking books. We can see this most vividly in the medieval period with the cathedral builders of Europe. The construction of a single Gothic cathedral could span centuries, far longer than any one human lifetime. How did they maintain stylistic and structural consistency over such an immense? The answer, again, lies in the mobile master mason. These men were the rock stars of their era. Names like Villard left behind sketchbooks that were essentially portable encyclopedias of design, filled with details for everything from window tracery to complex crane mechanisms. A master mason would often be hired for the initial design and to establish the crucial first phases of work. He would set the templates, train the local workforce in the core techniques, and then, as often as not, move on to the next city, the next commission, leaving his deputy in charge. His influence, however, remained embedded in the stone, and when a particularly tricky phase arose, like the vaulting of the choir, the community might pool resources to bring in a renowned specialist from another country, a man famous for his skill with such daring structures. This created a pan-European network of expertise, where French flamboyance could blend with English perpendicular style, all because the men who conceived these ideas were willing to travel. This system had profound social and economic implications. Being a highly mobile specialist offered a path to status and wealth that transcended local peasant life. These were not anonymous laborers. They were respected professionals who could negotiate their wages, who often had fine lodgings near the construction site, and whose opinions carried weight with even the highest patrons. Their mobility also made them agents of cultural diffusion in the most personal way. They carried not only their technical skills, but also stories, songs, news and fashion from one court or city to another. A goldsmith from Florence working for a duke in Burgundy would bring with him the latest artistic trends from Italy, influencing local tastes. In this way, the network of monumental construction subtly wove together the cultural fabric of entire regions, creating shared aesthetic values that went far beyond the building site. The true monument, then, was not just the finished temple or palace. It was also the elevated, interconnected community of minds that built it, a fellowship of skill that stretched across continents, turning the map of the ancient world into a web of wandering talent. But coordinating the movement of people and materials across vast distances presents another monumental challenge, one defined not by space, but by time. Ancient construction was not a steady, uninterrupted sprint. It was a marathon filled with unpredictable hurdles, a rhythm dictated by forces far beyond human control. The growing season, the flooding of the Nile, the winter freeze, the summer monsoon rains, even the sacred calendar of religious festivals, all of these could bring the hammering and hauling to a sudden, prolonged halt. In our modern world of global supply chains, we operate on a principle of just-in-time delivery, where materials arrive precisely when they are needed to minimize storage costs. For ancient project managers, such a concept would have been a recipe for catastrophic failure. Their world demanded a very different philosophy, just in case. This meant building resilience into the network through the strategic creation of buffer zones, acting as logistical capacitors to store energy and materials, ensuring the project's heartbeat continued even when its arteries were temporarily blocked. Think of a massive project like the Great Pyramid during the annual inundation of the Nile. For months, the floodwaters would transform the surrounding landscape into a vast lake, making agriculture impossible, but also halting most quarrying and overland transport. This was not a period of inactivity, however. It was a phase redirected by brilliant planning. While the fields were underwater, the same farmers who worked the land were conscripted for state labor, a workforce now suddenly available. But to employ them, the state needed to have materials ready and waiting. This is where the buffer zones proved critical. Enormous storage yards near the plateau would have held stockpiles of pre-cut limestone casing stones brought downriver during the previous season. Food supplies, grain, salted fish, legumes would have been accumulated from the last harvest and stored in vast granaries. The site itself became a kind of insulated bubble, a self-sufficient world where work could continue on the interior chambers, the precise fitting of stones, and the raising of blocks already on site, all while the outside world was reshaped by water. The network didn't stop. It pulsed, storing its energy in the wet season to expend it in the dry. These buffer zones took many forms, each a calculated answer to a specific logistical problem. Often the most strategic buffer was the quarry itself. At the Unfinished Obelisk quarry in Aswan, Egypt, we see a stunning snapshot of this process frozen in time. The giant obelisk, still attached to the bedrock, was partially carved and then abandoned. But for every successful obelisk that made it to a temple, there were likely many like this one, partially worked, held in reserve. Quarries functioned as open-air warehouses where stone was not just extracted, but also pre-shaped. By roughing out a column or an obelisk at the quarry, engineers drastically reduced its weight for transport and also hedged against future uncertainties. If political will wavered or funds grew short, the stone could wait, safely embedded in its birthplace, for years or even decades until the call came to complete its journey. This was inventory management on a geological scale. For perishable goods, the challenge of buffering was even more delicate. Timber, especially when needed for scaffolding or for the massive sledges used to move stones, could not be stockpiled for decades without risk of rot or insect damage. Here, the buffer zone was often a managed forest, a designated woodland area held in reserve and harvested according to a long-term schedule. The network extended into the future growth of trees. Similarly, the food supply for thousands of workers required a buffer not of salted meat alone, but of administrative foresight. Tax records from ancient empires show meticulous planning, where grain was collected from distant provinces and funneled into central granaries that served as the larders for state projects. Protecting these stockpiles from theft, vermin, and decay was a military-level operation, requiring secure silos, constant accounting, and rotations of old stock. A single season of poor harvests or a disruption in the grain supply network could empty these buffers and bring a decade of construction to a grinding, hungry halt. The true test of this system came during periods of extended disruption, like war or the death of a pharaoh. A change in leadership could freeze projects for years as the new ruler assessed priorities and consolidated power. During these interludes, the entire network entered a state of suspended animation. The buffer zones became absolutely vital. Partially worked stones sat in their quarries. Stockpiles of bronze tools were carefully oiled and stored. The skilled workforce might be dispersed to other tasks, but the material investment remained, patiently waiting for the signal to restart. This ability to pause and resume, sometimes generations later, speaks to the incredible institutional memory embedded in these systems. The blueprint and the material means were preserved, separate from the fleeting lives of any individual king or architect. The buffer zones, therefore, were more than just storage. They were the physical memory of the state's ambition, a promise made in stone and grain that could outlive political turmoil, ensuring that a vision conceived by a grandfather could be completed by a grandson, all because the network had the capacity to wait. So how do we, centuries or even later, begin to map these ghostly networks, these vanished supply chains that left no blueprints behind? The answer lies in a fascinating blend of high technology and old-fashioned detective work, a field known as provenance science. Imagine an archaeologist not with just a brush and trowel, but as a forensic investigator at the scene of a grand, centuries-long event. Their task is to trace the journey of materials, to follow the clues left in the very substance of the monuments and the landscapes around them. The first and perhaps most direct method is geochemical fingerprinting. Every stone has a story written in its minerals. The bluestones at Stonehenge, for instance, contain distinctive crystals and chemical signatures that act like a geological postal code. By taking tiny, carefully drilled samples from the monument and comparing them to samples from potential quarry sites across the British Isles, scientists were able to match the stone not just to a general region, but specifically to the hills in Wales. This single finding transformed our understanding, proving a deliberate long-distance transport operation rather than a reliance on glacial movement or local resources. Similarly, the white marble of famous classical statues can be traced to specific quarries on mountains like in Greece or Carrara in Italy, revealing the precise economic and cultural arteries of the ancient Mediterranean world. But stone is only one piece of the puzzle. To understand the demand for timber and fuel, scientists turn to a quieter kind of record, pollen. By extracting long cores of sediment from lake beds and peat bogs near ancient construction sites, researchers can analyze the layers of pollen grains that have settled over thousands of years. These layers act as a timeline of the surrounding plant life. A sudden, dramatic decline in tree pollen like oak or pine, followed by a rise in pollen from pioneer weeds and grasses, paints a clear picture of large-scale deforestation. By dating these sediment layers, we can often link these ecological events directly to known periods of intense construction, like the cathedral building boom in medieval Europe. This allows us to map not just the movement of wood, but the radiating impact zone of the project, showing how the hunger for resources reshaped environments dozens of miles away, leaving an invisible scar in the mud that only science can now read. The human touch provides another vital clue. The marks left by tools are as distinctive as handwriting. The specific angle of a bronze chisel on Egyptian limestone, the pattern of a pickaxe on a Roman quarry wall, or the technique used to smooth a Maya plaster floor. These are signatures of tradition and workshop practice. When identical tool marks are found on stones at a distant quarry and on the finished blocks of a monument, it creates a powerful link. It suggests that not just the raw material, but perhaps the skilled workers themselves, or their very specific methods, traveled along the network. This turns the anonymous block into a piece of evidence, carrying with it the ghost of the artisan who shaped it and hinting at the transfer of knowledge along the supply route. Perhaps the most dramatic shift in uncovering these networks has come from the view from above. Satellite imagery and aerial photography, especially techniques like LiDAR, which uses lasers to penetrate dense forest canopy, have revealed the skeletons of ancient landscapes. What looks like an empty field from the ground may, from space, show the faint but distinct parallel lines of a long-vanished cart road leading from a river port to a temple complex. In the deserts of Arabia, satellite images have uncovered vast, ancient pathways marked by countless camel caravans, the Silk Roads of an earlier age. LiDAR has exposed hidden causeways connecting Maya cities through the jungle, proving that what we once thought were isolated ceremonial centers were in fact nodes in a sophisticated web of transportation and communication. These technologies allow us to see the network's infrastructure itself, the very roads and canals that formed its veins and arteries, now buried under centuries of soil and vegetation. The final step is the painstaking work of synthesis, of connecting all these disparate dots of evidence. A geochemical match from a quarry, a pollen record of deforestation along a river valley, tool marks that link a workshop to a palace, and a satellite-revealed road connecting them all, these pieces form a chain of custody. By weaving together data from geology, botany, chemistry, and remote sensing, archaeologists can reconstruct the map of flows. They can estimate the volume of material moved, the seasons in which transport was possible, and the sheer organizational effort required. This forensic reconstruction does more than just solve a logistical mystery. It breathes life back into the landscape, allowing us to visualize the procession of barges laden with stone moving down a river, the teams of oxen straining on a newly built causeway, and the distant hillsides being steadily stripped of trees to feed the ambition of a civilization. The monument ceases to be a solitary object and becomes once again the brilliant, busy destination at the end of an invisible highway, a testament written not in words, but in the very movement of the earth itself. It's a powerful realization that the challenges faced by ancient project managers are not relics of a distant past. In fact, the very same principles that moved stones from Welsh hills to Salisbury Plain are operating right now on a planetary scale. Our modern cathedrals are skyscrapers piercing the clouds, our pyramids are colossal dams holding back rivers, and our most enigmatic monuments are perhaps vast scientific instruments like the Large Hadron Collider, buried deep underground. Each of these contemporary megaprojects is the hub of a staggering global supply chain, a digital age echo of those ancient physical networks. Consider the in Dubai. Its silhouette is iconic, but its substance is international. The high-performance concrete that forms its spine was developed using materials from around the world, tested to withstand the extreme desert heat. Its gleaming curtain wall, a skin of glass and metal, was manufactured in factories across Asia, Europe, and North America, each panel precisely engineered before being shipped across oceans. The steel for its structural skeleton followed a similar global journey. This was not a project built from local resources. It was a project that summoned the specialized best of the entire planet to a single point, coordinated not by runners with clay tablets, but by a constant, instantaneous digital chatter of emails, three-dimensional models, and satellite tracking. The most striking difference, of course, is velocity and visibility. Where an Egyptian vizier might wait months for a report from a quarry in the Sinai, a project manager in Shanghai can see the real-time location of a shipment of specialized bolts on a cargo ship in the Pacific, adjust a fabrication schedule in Milan with a video call, and approve a design change from architects in New York, all within an hour. Information transparency has reached a level that would seem like magic to an ancient administrator. Yet, for all this technological wizardry, the fundamental human and logistical puzzles remain eerily familiar. The sourcing of specialized materials is still a geopolitical and geological scavenger hunt. Transporting massive, fragile components, like a wind turbine blade or a prefabricated bridge section, requires feats of engineering just as daring as moving an obelisk, employing specialized ships, colossal trailers, and carefully planned routes that avoid low bridges and tight corners. Managing a workforce drawn from dozens of countries, with different languages and specializations, requires a social and organizational framework as complex as any that supported the multi-ethnic crews of the Roman Empire. And the financing, that ultimate engine, still involves concentrating vast economic resources, whether through corporate investment, sovereign wealth, or international consortiums, mirroring the tribute and taxation systems of old. This parallel offers us more than just a neat comparison. It provides a profound lens for understanding the unchanging core of human ambition. When we study how the Romans organized the marble trade from quarries in Turkey, Greece, and Egypt to build the Forum, we are essentially looking at a slower, analog version of a modern global logistics company. The problems of quality control, of scheduling, of preventing theft or loss in transit, of maintaining morale among the workers are universal constants. By understanding the ancient networks, we gain a stripped-down, clear-view model of how complex systems function without the noise of modern technology. It shows us that the core of these achievements is not ultimately the crane or the computer, but the human capacity for intricate planning, long-term cooperation, and shared purpose. The cathedral builders of Chartres did not have instant communication, but they had a shared belief system and a guild structure that transmitted knowledge across generations. Our modern projects have digital networks, but they still rely on shared goals, whether corporate, national, or scientific, to align the efforts of thousands. Looking at a modern megaproject through this historical lens also highlights a sobering continuity in terms of impact. Just as the demand for cedar for Near Eastern temples altered the landscapes of Lebanon, our demand for rare earth minerals for electronics, or vast amounts of sand and aggregate for concrete, reshapes environments and communities worldwide. The supply chain for a single smartphone touches mines, factories, and shipping lanes across continents, with social and environmental costs that are often hidden from the end user. Much like the distant quarry slave was invisible to the citizen admiring a new statue in the Roman Forum. The scale is global now, but the pattern of extracting resources from afar and concentrating them in a center of power or prestige remains. This perspective challenges us to ask whether our logistical brilliance has truly evolved, or if we have simply scaled up ancient patterns without fully addressing their consequences. It suggests that the true measure of our progress may not be in whether we can build a taller tower, but in whether we can build a more equitable and sustainable network to support it. Yet for all the sophisticated tools we now use to map ancient trade routes and analyze quarry sources, some stones remain stubbornly silent, their journeys seemingly defying the very logistical frameworks we have so carefully built. This brings us to the sites that live at the heart of enduring mystery, places where the standard explanations of ramps, rollers, and large workforces are stretched to their absolute limit, inviting speculation and sometimes fierce debate. Consider the colossal stone trilogy known as the In the Ruins of Baalbek in modern-day Lebanon. Here, 3 monstrously large limestone blocks, each estimated to weigh around 800 tons, sit perfectly fitted together in a retaining wall. The quarry from which they were cut lies less than a mile away, and there, still attached to the bedrock, lies an even larger block, nicknamed the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, weighing a staggering 1,200 tons. Moving a single stone of this scale is a problem of almost incomprehensible magnitude. Mainstream archaeology proposes a system of immense levers, a meticulously constructed and gradually raised earthen ramp, and the coordinated muscle of thousands of workers and oxen, possibly over a period of many months for just one block. It is a plausible, if breathtaking, scenario rooted in known ancient engineering principles. On the other side of the world, at the high-altitude site of Puma in Bolivia, the puzzle is one of precision rather than sheer mass. The andesite and red sandstone blocks here are not just large, they are fiendishly complex, featuring geometric cuts, razor-sharp edges, and interlocking channels that look almost machined. Some of these stones weigh over 100 tons and were transported from quarries many miles away across difficult terrain. The conventional view suggests a society with extraordinary skill in stoneworking, using harder stone tools, abrasive sand, and an immense amount of patient labor to achieve these finishes. The transport, again, would rely on a large, organized labor force, likely using fiber ropes, log rollers, and a profound understanding of leverage and inertia. These mainstream explanations are not lazy assumptions. They are conclusions built on a cumulative understanding of human technological progression, ethnographic parallels from more recent cultures, and the physical evidence of tool marks and abandoned pathways. However, the staggering nature of these accomplishments has naturally spawned alternative theories. For some, the gap between what we know about these cultures' typical technology and the final product seems too vast to bridge with known methods alone. This has led to proposals of lost technologies, perhaps a form of sound or vibrational levitation described in certain legends, or a forgotten chemical compound that could soften stone to a clay-like consistency for shaping. The most popularized and most controversial alternative is the idea of extraterrestrial intervention, suggesting that such feats were beyond human capability and therefore must have required off-world knowledge or assistance. It is crucial to understand why these theories emerge and persist with such vigor. They are not merely the province of fringe thinkers. They are, in a real sense, a testament to the profound awe these sites inspire. When faced with a 1,200-ton block perfectly positioned, or a stone surface cut with sub-millimeter precision, the human mind seeks an explanation that matches the scale of the wonder. If our current historical narrative feels insufficient to explain the feat, the imagination leaps to fill the void with narratives of advanced ancient civilizations or otherworldly visitors. Engaging with these debates, rather than dismissing them outright, is academically valuable. They serve as a powerful reminder of the gaps that still exist in our understanding. They force archaeologists and engineers to re-examine their assumptions, to conduct new experiments, and to ask better questions. Could the workforce at Baalbek have been larger than currently estimated? Could there have been a clever, yet simple, method of transport, using water-slicked clay paths that has left no obvious archaeological trace? The controversies highlight that for all our geochemical fingerprinting and satellite imagery, we are still interpreting a fragmentary record. The alternative theories, in their own way, underscore the central theme of our entire exploration. The achievements of these ancient networks were so extraordinary that they continue to challenge the limits of our imagination centuries later. They push us to keep looking, keep experimenting, and remain humble in the face of our ancestors' ingenuity. Whether one subscribes to the mainstream view or finds intrigue in the alternatives, the undeniable truth is that these stones moved. They were extracted, transported, and lifted by a system, a network of knowledge, labor, and will that we are still striving to fully comprehend. And that enduring mystery is perhaps the most compelling legacy of all. But to view these networks merely as supply lines, as the ancient equivalent of a freight schedule, is to miss their deeper, more transformative role in history. They were far more than the means to an end. They were cultural artifacts of the highest order living systems that shaped societies in ways that often outlasted the very monuments they were built to serve. Consider the journey itself. The path a sacred stone took from a distant quarry to a temple could become through repetition, evolving from a simple haul road into a ceremonial processional way. Pilgrims would later walk the same path that the giant blocks had traveled, retracing the sacred journey in a spiritual reenactment. The route was no longer just a line on a map. It was a narrative written into the landscape, connecting the origin of the divine material to its final, holy resting place. This transformed geography into theology, where every stop along the way could become a minor shrine, commemorating the effort and the miracle of transport. These networks also acted as powerful seeds for urban growth. A humble docking point where stone was transferred from ship to sledge could, over decades of constant activity, grow into a bustling port town. Workers, merchants, and administrators would settle there, needing housing, markets, and temples. The infrastructure built for the construction project, warehouses, wells, repaired roads, became the permanent foundation for a new community. Many of the world's great historic cities can trace their origins back to such logistical nodes. A place that started as a simple on a supply network could accumulate people, wealth, and importance, eventually becoming a political or economic center in its own right, its original purpose fading into legend, but its existence a direct legacy of that ancient flow of resources. Perhaps most profoundly, the shared effort of building forged a common identity. When people from different regions, speaking different dialects, were mobilized toward a single, awe-inspiring goal, something powerful happened. The farmer from the north and the quarryman from the south, both contributing to the king's Great Pyramid, became part of something larger than their local village. They shared in the hardship, the technical challenges, and the ultimate pride of creation. This collective endeavor could soften regional differences and foster a sense of shared purpose and national identity. The network, in this sense, was a social loom, weaving disparate threads of population into a more cohesive cultural fabric. The monument became a symbol of what they could achieve together, but the process of building it was the actual experience that taught them what together truly meant. And then there were the protocols, the unwritten rules and formal administrations that governed the network. The system of messengers, the standard measures for timber and stone, the ration scales for workers, these were not just practical tools, they were institutions. They represented a new way of organizing human activity across space and time. Once established to manage a construction project, these systems of organization often persisted. The bureaucracy created to count stones for a ziggurat might later be adapted to count grain for the state treasury. The communication routes used to send quarrying orders became the empire's postal system. The network's administrative framework proved so useful that it was maintained long after the last stone was laid, becoming part of the governmental backbone of the civilization itself. This leads us to a profound realization. While we rightly marvel at the Great Pyramid or the Parthenon, we are admiring only the most visible, durable tip of a colossal iceberg. The true monument was not just the stone structure, it was the entire invisible system that conceived of it, supplied it, and organized its creation. That system, the network of quarries, roads, ports, workshops, and administrative offices, was a masterpiece of social engineering. It was a physical manifestation of a civilization's ambition, its organizational genius, and its collective will. It was etched not in immutable granite, but in the dynamic living patterns of movement, exchange, and cooperation. When the last priest left the temple and the monuments began their long silence, the cultural pathways carved by those networks often remained, directing the flow of people, ideas, and trade for centuries to come. The stones stood as a testament to a king's power, but the network that delivered them was the true testament to a society's capability. So let us finally weave all these threads together and see the complete tapestry. Monumental construction was never a singular act of engineering, it was the apex, the dazzling final output of a vast and deeply interdependent system. Think of it as a colossal, living organism. The finished temple or tomb is merely the visible shell, the exoskeleton. But inside, animating it, was a complete circulatory, nervous, and skeletal system made of people, ideas, and materials in constant motion. This system sat at the center of an immense web, its strands stretching out in every direction, pulling in everything needed to sustain the dream of stone. First, the physical resources, the lifeblood of the project, stone from distant mountains, timber from remote forests, and metal from deep within the earth. Then, the human resources, the muscle and mind of the endeavor, the labor of thousands, the specialized skill of master artisans, and the intangible but vital fuel of shared belief and ideology. And finally, the logistical resources, the connective tissue that made it all possible, the transport routes over land and water, the administrative bureaucracy to manage it, and the economic engines of tribute, trade, or taxation that paid for it all. The critical insight here is that none of these strands existed or functioned in isolation. They were all part of a single, integrated whole, each one supporting and being supported by the others in a delicate balance. This interdependence meant that the entire system was only as strong as its most fragile link. A vivid example makes this clear. Imagine the quarry crews at a distant mountainside, diligently cutting blocks for a pharaoh's pyramid. Their work depends not just on their own strength and tools, but on a cascade of other networks functioning perfectly. They need food and water, delivered via the Sustenance network from the Nile Valley. Their bronze chisels need constant sharpening or replacement, relying on the metal trade network that brings copper and tin from mines hundreds of miles away. Wooden sledges and rollers they use to move the cut stone depend on the timber network, which is harvesting trees from a managed forest. Now imagine a drought strikes the farmlands. The food supply network falters. Hungry quarry workers cannot maintain their output. The flow of stone to the river transport network slows. Suddenly, at the pyramid site itself, the meticulously scheduled workforce faces delays. Masons wait idly for materials, consuming rations but not progressing the build. The administrative network is flooded with panic-stricken messages. The financial cost escalates. A single break in one strand, the food supply, sends shockwaves through the entire web, threatening to unravel the entire project. This vulnerability reveals the true complexity of what they were managing, a system with thousands of moving parts stretched across a continent. Therefore, when we look at a finished monument like the Great Pyramid of Giza, we are not just looking at a tomb. We are looking at a frozen snapshot, a single frame from a motion picture that lasted decades. That frame captures the peak operational capacity of Old Kingdom Egypt at that specific moment in time. It tells us in stone that the civilization had achieved an unprecedented level of central control. It had the agricultural surplus to feed a non-farming workforce for generations. It had the geological knowledge to identify the finest limestone and granite, and the engineering skill to extract it. It had the naval and overland transport capacity to move these megablocks with rhythmic precision. It had the administrative literacy to track every block, every work gang, every loaf of bread. And it had the ideological unity to convince a significant portion of its population to contribute to this generational effort. The pyramid is the ultimate audit report, written not on papyrus but on the Giza Plateau, proving that every branch of the state apparatus, from agriculture to the priesthood, was functioning in coordinated harmony. This holistic view changes everything. It moves us beyond simplistic questions of how they cut the stones or dragged them up ramps. It forces us to ask the more profound, systemic questions. How did they organize a society to be capable of such a feat? How did they manage the information flow across such vast distances without digital technology? How did they maintain social stability and motivation over longer than most modern lifetimes? The monument becomes a doorway into understanding the civilization's total capability, its strengths, and ultimately its pressures. When we study the pyramid, we are really reverse engineering the 4th dynasty Egyptian state. We are mapping its supply chains, calculating its economic output, and deciphering its social contracts. The silent stones are the endpoints, but the real story is the vibrant, humming, impossibly complex network that converged at that point to leave this permanent mark on the world. It was a web of ambition, where every strand of resource, human and logistical, was tensioned perfectly against the others, holding the impossible dream aloft until the final capstone was set, and the system could finally, after decades of relentless effort, fall silent. As we look back at the silent stones of ancient wonders, we now see them not as isolated achievements, but as the terminal points of epic journeys. Each block of granite at the base of an Egyptian obelisk, each cedar beam high in a Mesopotamian ziggurat, each slab of jade in a Chinese tomb represents a story. It is a story that begins deep within the earth or at the heart of a distant forest, a story written in the language of logistics, carved by the hands of thousands, and directed by minds thinking on a scale we still struggle to comprehend. The long-distance resource networks required to sustain monumental construction were the true engines of these marvels. While we rightly marvel at the precision of the stonework or the audacity of the design, these are the final, frozen expressions of a much grander and more dynamic feat. The real masterpiece was the living, breathing system that operated for decades, sometimes centuries, to make that final form possible. It was a feat of social organization, so advanced it could coordinate the diets and duties of an army of workers. It was an exercise in environmental manipulation that reshaped landscapes hundreds of miles away. And it was a demonstration of economic might that could redirect the wealth of an entire region toward a single, symbolic goal. These logistical triumphs, in their complexity and scale, truly rival the physical engineering of the structures they served. They teach us a profound and timeless lesson about human achievement. Greatness on this scale is rarely, if ever, a solo act. It is not the product of a lone genius architect or a single powerful ruler, though such figures often provide the initial vision. Instead, it is a chorus. Imagine the sound of that chorus, a harmony built from countless individual voices across space and time. It includes the quarryman in Wales swinging his hammer against the dolerite that will become a Stonehenge bluestone. It includes the Phoenician sailor navigating a cargo of Lebanese cedar down the coast toward Egypt. It includes the scribe in Mesopotamia carefully marking a clay tablet to account for a shipment of bitumen. It includes the farmer on the Nile floodplain growing an extra portion of grain destined for the plateau at Giza. It includes the mother who tells her child stories of the God King, embedding the belief that will one day motivate that child to contribute their labor. This chorus spans continents, linking the mountain to the plain, the forest to the desert, the mine to the temple. It spans generations, with fathers and sons, mothers and daughters, all playing a part in a story whose conclusion they themselves might never witness. The monument is the lasting note they all sang together, a permanent echo of their collective effort. So the next time you have the privilege to stand before an ancient monument, whether in person or through an image, try a new way of seeing. Look beyond the imposing facade, past the familiar silhouette against the sky. Instead, let your mind's eye trace the invisible lines that converge at that very spot. Envision the highways of ambition, now silent and overgrown, that once pulsed with activity. Picture the river that carried stone-laden barges, now perhaps a dry wadi or a modern canal. See the ghost of the road worn smooth by countless feet and dragging sledges. Sense the presence of the temporary towns that housed workers, the storage yards that held seasons of material, and the administrative offices where the grand plan was broken down into daily tasks. See the monument not as a static object, but as the destination point for a million journeys, the solution to a million logistical problems, the focal point where an entire civilization's capability was concentrated and made visible. In doing so, you honor not just the edifice, but the epic human endeavor that willed it from the earth and set it against the horizon. The stone itself is the answer. The network is the breathtaking question of how and why humanity would ever go to such lengths to create something meant to outlast us all. If this journey through the hidden arteries of ancient ambition has sparked your curiosity, consider this a beginning rather than an end. History is filled with these silent, sprawling systems, the unspoken frameworks upon which our visible past is built. What other incredible networks are waiting for their story to be told? Perhaps the intricate relay of messengers that sustained the Inca Empire along the Andean peaks, or the vast seafaring routes that connected the spice islands of Southeast Asia to the palaces of the ancient world. Every civilization that reached for grandeur left behind a blueprint of its logistics, a map of its reach, if we only know how to look. I am genuinely curious to hear which system resonated most with you. Was it the maritime daring of the Polynesians moving sacred stones across the open ocean, or the bureaucratic precision of the Mesopotamian scribes tracking every brick? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and let's start a conversation. Your perspective adds another valuable piece to the puzzle. And if you want to join us as we uncover more of these untold stories, be sure to subscribe and tap that notification bell. Together, we can pull on these loose threads of history, seeing what magnificent tapestries of human effort and ingenuity begin to unravel. Let's keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep connecting the dots across time.